queria aqui desejar as boas-vindas a vocês a essa segunda edição do SP Audiovisual Hub, que é uma iniciativa da Secretaria da Cultura, Economia e Indústria Criativas do Estado de São Paulo, com curadoria e gestão do CIAESP, parceria com APA, MIS, FAAP e SEBRAE. A gente tem hoje e amanhã ainda dias intensos de atividade, acontecendo inclusive paralelamente. Daqui a pouco a gente vai ter um painel com o Daniel Rezende, as rodadas de negócio. De tarde a gente tem mais 2 debates, amanhã também a gente está a pleno vapor aqui. E eu recomendaria fortemente aqui para vocês de acompanharem alguns desses debates. Eles estão muito interessantes, tem uma seleção de pessoas muito legal e temas inspiradores, vamos dizer assim. Agora a gente vai ter o workshop de Vendas e Distribuição Internacional, como funciona, como negociar bons acordos e estratégias de vendas, com Florencia Gasparini Rey, que é consultora sênior de vendas da agência de vendas Real Suspects, especializada em vendas internacionais e marketing para filmes independentes, trabalhou com empresas como Film Sharks, MBI, Blue Fox e Cinema Management Group. Trabalhou a venda do título brasileiro A Arca de Noé, uma das maiores animações realizadas por aqui, dirigida pelo Sérgio Machado e a Loa Diliel. Atualmente ela colabora com a Real Suspects, sediada em Paris, e é diretora de marketing da Caju Cinema. Florencia, bem-vinda. Welcome. Tudo bem? Então, desejo a vocês um bom workshop.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming, for being here this morning with this weather. I really appreciate your effort. First off, I would like to apologize because I don't speak Portuguese. I'm from Argentina, and, I feel ashamed that we are so close, and still I can't speak your language in a country that I love so much. Also, I could speak Portuguese, but it's not, it's not formal for a situation like this. So let's do it in English. So, do we have the presentation? Yes. Perfect. Okay. So, we're going to talk this morning about international sales and distribution strategies. So, there it is. Maurice already told you a little bit about myself, but I want to tell you a little bit of my story for you to understand where my experience comes from and from where I'm gonna talk this morning. Because really, when it comes to international sales, there are like no golden rules or there are or fixed formulas, So it's something that I had to learn over the years. Almost 20 years ago, I was in film school, and I realized that all my colleagues wanted to be directors, screenwriters. Some of them wanted to be VPs, editors. Maybe some of them wanted to be producers. But really, nobody cared about distribution. Everybody wanted to make movies, but nobody knew where their movies were going to be seen, and nobody thought who would do that job for them. So, I thought, okay, someone has to do this. Someone has to do this kind of dirty job, they thought it was, right? So I said, and I have a talent to convince people to watch the movies that I like and even the movies that I don't like. So I said, okay, I have to do this. So the only way that I found was like learning by working, I had very few knowledge on that. Truly, in film school, I had like just one class, one morning, 4 hours, and that's it. That's everything I learned from distribution. So I noticed also that even film schools were not teaching distribution. So, I started like around 15 years ago working in international sales with different companies in Argentina, in Europe, in the US. And almost 2 years ago, I decided to become a consultant because I finally had the experience to teach what I wanted to teach my colleagues. So I've been working with different international programs for institutions like Euromedia, the French Institute in Argentina, Proimágenes in Colombia, because really, I really wanted to share this experience with filmmakers in general, because I think really it's important, to understand, even if you're not going to be a distributor yourself, it's important to understand the business, because it's part of the creation of your project, right? It's not something that happens at the end. I attended all of those markets and some others, and I work with some of the movies that you can see there. Like Maurice mentioned, one of the movies that made me happier was Arca de Noé. I also worked recently with Real Suspects. We've been working with Love Kills, a vampire movie here from Brazil. So I also have a lot of experience working in animation. Last year, I became the coordinator of Ventana Sur animation. Ventana Sur, it's the biggest market here in Latin America that this year will take place in Montevideo. So I'm not telling you this to brag about myself, just for you to understand that my knowledge doesn't come from books, it comes from my own experience. But again, I really think it's important to share this, right? And so without further to say, let's go to what we're going to cover this morning. So my goal this morning is for you to understand a little bit of how this distribution business works. So I want to cover, what international distribution means today, how the films generate value, also understanding what positioning your film means, because, before selling or trying to sell your film, you have to understand what kind of film you have. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about different international distribution paths, because, a feature film, an animated feature film doesn't circulate the same way as a documentary or even as a short film. I know usually, when we talk about sales, we usually talk about feature films, but I want to talk a little bit about how to distribute the short film as well, because I know many of you might have done short films or might be still far from making a feature film, but you still have to understand how to make value out of your short films. So also we're going to talk, like I said, about the festival strategy for short films or for movies that are not necessarily commercial or don't really need to or don't depend on sales. Of course, we're going to talk about strategies for international sales. And once we get there, we're going to go into the details of how agreements work, the responsibilities that both parts have, both the sales agent and the producers, and realistic expectations, because sometimes we tend to think, okay, I have a sales agent, now I'm going to make money. And it's not always like that. So this is a little bit of what we're going to cover today. Oops. There we go. Okay, so before we start, I want you to raise your hands. How many directors do we have here? Okay. Producers? Good, more producers. I like that. And do we have students in the room? Good. Any other distributors? Good. You're going to put pressure on me. And I would like to know also what kind of projects are you working on? Do you have any short film? Raise your hand. Good. Any feature, live action feature? Good. Documentaries? Good. Many documentaries. And, I asked short films already. No. Okay, good. Just to understand a little bit where we are. So, also, I would like to share with you a few definitions before we start, because I think, we're going to go over these concepts through the morning. So I want, to make some differences and for you to understand really, what some words mean, because sometimes it can sound obvious, but sometimes it's confusing. So, festivals and markets are not the same thing. Festivals are events for visibility, recognition, and audience exposure. It's where you take your movie for people to see it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to buy it here and there. To buy it, you have to go, to sell your movie, you have to go to a market. A market, it's a place or an event where the projects and films meet the industry professionals, the buyers, and the potential partners in their different stages of production or post-production or distribution. There are festivals that have markets, of course, but not necessarily all festivals have markets, or not necessarily all markets have festivals. The biggest film market and festival in the world is Cannes, with the Marché du Film. Berlin also has its market, the EFM, the European Film Market. But for example, you have the American Film Market in the US, in Los Angeles, that doesn't have a festival. It's just a market. It's pure business there. And then, well, like I said, in South America, you have Ventana Sur. And then, well, one important concept that you need to understand is that in markets, you will meet sales agents. Sales agents are companies that represent your film internationally and connects it with buyers around the world. Like I said, not everybody might need a sales agent, but if you need it, we're going to talk later how to work with them. So now we're ready to go really into the content of this workshop. If anybody has a question at any time, please raise your hands and let me know. We're going to have a Q&A by the end. But in the meantime, if anything is not clear or you want to, want me to explore a little bit more about something, just let me know. So I already defined what a sales agent is. Now I want to make also a big difference that sometimes, is not clear. International sales is not the same as domestic distribution. You might hear domestic distribution is a concept that it's used a lot in the US, but, unfortunately, somehow they make the rules, so we tend to follow what they say. So international sales, like I said, is different than domestic. The international sales refers to licensing the film rights from a producer, usually through a sales agent, to buyers in other countries or regions. It's not the same than domestic distribution. Like I said, domestic distribution is the local distribution in your own country. That's something that usually you do as a producer directly with the distributor in your country. That's something that not necessarily has to be negotiated by your sales agent. But then when we talk about, what we negotiate with the sales agent, we can go into detail about that. But you need to have that difference clear. International sales is what the sales agent does for the rest of the world. Domestic is what you do in your own country. So usually the chain is a producer signs an agreement with a sales agent. The sales agent takes your film to distributors, and the distributors sell or place your film with the exhibitors. That's the more traditional and old school way of distributing. To have it clear, a sales agent is kind of like a broker, a real estate broker. You have a deal with them. They represent your film. That doesn't mean that they own your film. You give them the right to represent your film internationally for a certain amount of time and to enter contracts with local distributors on your behalf. So like I said, the chain that you see there it was like the traditional chain of distribution and the oldest one, that it's still active and valid, but it's not the only way of distributing today. Today when we talk about international distribution, it's broader than this traditional sales model. So what is international distribution today, or what is distribution today, really? So how do films generate value today in your local country and internationally? Well, you still have theaters, of course. You have everything that is related to showing your film on big screens. It can be, like I said, cinemas. It can be any kind of special screenings. It can be festivals, of course. That we're going to talk about that later too. But, when you put your film in a festival, usually festivals pay you a fee, so you also make money from going through to festivals. But of course, there are other windows as well to show your film. TV is one of the oldest as well, but we have streaming today too, and we have other circuits like the educational and cultural circuit. You can put some films, especially like documentaries and short films, can have a circuit in universities, museums, institutions, not necessarily cinemas or festivals. Also, you can make money from all the ancillary rights. It's secondary rights connected to selling your film to airplanes, cruise ships, hotels. Just bear in mind that every time you see a film somewhere, someone must have paid for those rights. Sometimes they don't, and that's not legal. But usually everywhere, someone has the authority to show your film, and you as a producer are entitled to receive a compensation for your film being shown anywhere. And also today, are more like direct to audience kind of distribution. Today you can do your own distribution by putting your film maybe on Vimeo and, charging a little fee for people to watch it. And you can build your own distribution strategy, through social media, through promoting your film, on Instagram, on TikTok, and tracking people to watch your film on a platform. So really, there are a lot of ways of distributing films today, and not all of them necessarily need, a sales agent or a distributor, but it's important for you to understand how that chain works, so you can find your own path and find your own distribution model. Also, one thing that I want to highlight is that short films rarely generate significant revenue through international sales. I mean, I don't want to disappoint you, but you can ask, as much as I said that, my field of expertise is feature films, you can ask distributors of short films and they will tell you the same, that, that usually they don't make money selling the short films themselves, but short films have other kind of value. We're going to talk about that later too, so don't get disappointed. You still have big chances with your short films. It's just that they don't work in the traditional way that feature films work. So one thing that we have to understand before selling or trying to sell our film or distributing is that we need to understand where our film is standing, where it's positioned internationally. Before designing a strategy, you need to understand really what your project is, what you have, and what chances it has in the market. So you have to make a few questions, from the very beginning. It's like, that's why I say that, thinking of distribution, it's really a creative process. It's part of the creative process. When you are writing, you are thinking, how your film is going to look, how it's going to sound, everything, you're already thinking how your characters are going to talk, who are going to be the actors. So also you need to ask yourself, who's going to watch this movie? Who's going to be my audience? Because if you don't know who your audience is, it's really difficult to think of a distribution strategy, because distribution at the end of the day, it's part of, it's not the end of the chain. Like you tend to think, making a movie or movies themselves are communication. So, if you have a message and you fail to deliver it, or you don't know who your audience is, who you're talking to, communication fails. And the way, to make this communication effective is through having a good distributor, have a good distribution strategy, knowing how to place your film in the market. So that's, again, something you need to start thinking while you are designing your project. So one thing that you have to ask yourself, is if your film is commercial or festival driven. I mean, be honest about that. Do you think this is a movie that it's gonna be, that it's gonna be thought for a big audience that you're gonna see in theaters? Do you have a big actor? Do you have something that makes your film really commercial, attractive for cinemas or for audiences in general? Or is it something more festival-driven, something, that it's going to find its best audience in a particular niche, for a certain target audience, like, you think this is something for adults, for people who are more into certain cinema and not, going to theaters to see comedies. Also, of course, define what is your primary genre, because that's also part of the positioning. Is it a horror movie? Is it a comedy? Again, is it a more author-driven film? What makes it stand out? Is it the director? Is it the talent attached? Is it like the actors? Is it the cinematography? Sometimes, you see movies that are so well made technically that you get impressed and you start talking to other people about how well they look and, how impressive it was. Sometimes it's even the music, but it's finding what makes your film stand out among the others. Because, in today's market, making a movie, it's not really the hardest part, I should say. I'm not saying it's not difficult, but, we keep hearing stories and watching films that you see, oh, this movie was made with an iPhone 5, and it looks amazing. So it's not really the problem today making a movie. The problem is really distributing it, right? Movies get made all the time, but how many of them make it to the cinemas, to the screens, to the TVs, platforms, everything. So, you need to understand what you have to succeed in that. Also, what is your target audience? Again, like I said at the beginning, this is communication. If you don't know who you're talking to, you're not going to be able to deliver your message. And at the end of the day, do you really want to do a movie that nobody will see, Are you doing it just for your own ego, or you really want to communicate something? You really have a message to say. Well, think who you're talking to. It's not the same talking to kids than talking to adults, than talking to teenagers. And please avoid saying my film is for all audiences. That doesn't exist. I know we all aim to have, a big audience, and we all think, oh, everybody can watch my movie, but be realistic about that. Like I said, it's not the same talking to kids than to teenagers. It's not even the same talking to preschoolers than talking to kids who are, 7, 8, 10, so be very specific about that. Of course, try to make your film as broader as possible. If you're making a kids movie and just bear in mind that the ones that are going to take the kids to the theaters are their parents. So try to make it, family friendly. But have in mind very clear that, there isn't a specific target audience, main target audience. So you have to define that from the very beginning. Also, does it have international appeal? That's another question you have to ask. Again, be very honest when responding this, and try to be, as realistic as possible. What kind of story do you have? Do you have a story that has more international for your local market, but maybe not for the rest of the world? And that's not necessarily something bad. Some movies are just for the local market, and that's okay. For many years, Brazil had a big production of comedies that work very well locally, but not internationally. And that's still great, because for producers, to have such a big market in Brazil, it's good. But maybe, when it comes to humor is very culturally specific. So again, it's attractive for the local market, but not for the international. And sometimes we have stories of very local characters that are super attractive for your own country, but internationally that they are not well known, or it's not attractive. That doesn't mean that you can't do a movie about a local character or a local story and make it international, right? How many times we see movies of people or stories that we don't know and they are amazing. But you have to find a way to connect internationally with the audience. Try to make something that it's local, try to make it universal, try to find which values, which highlights, which things this movie has to connect internationally and not just stay in your local audience. Also, what are the comps? When you're thinking of your movie, think of other movies that are similar to yours or that you would like your film to be similar to, and think how they worked, how they were distributed, how they work in each country, which was the audience for those movies. Also, the budget and the production values, of course, are important. And those are two different things, because the budget is actually what the movie costs, and the production value is how it looks. You can make a movie with a very low budget, but very good production values. You can have wonderful cinematography. You can have wonderful scenarios, locations. You can have great actors. Sometimes having a good actor doesn't necessarily mean that you pay the fortune for them. So that's the production value. The budget is what actually your film costs. That's something that you also need to have in mind. Also, what's the language of your film? We're in Brazil, so we tend to think, well, movies are going to be made in Portuguese. But sometimes, the market, the international market especially, pushes for films to be made in English. You're going to hear this 1,000 times. And this is something that comes really from my own experience. I have to tell you that I learned that it's easier to sell a good foreign language film. And when I say foreign language, I said anything that it's not English. Again, remember that the definitions come from the US. I don't make this definition. So it's good. It's better to sell, or it's easier to sell a good foreign language film than a mediocre American or US or English speaking film. It happened to me many times that I had movies when working with American companies. I had movies that had American actors, like, I wouldn't say B class, but actors that maybe were well known 10 years ago and now they are not. And those movies really don't sell. In today's market, you either have an A-list actor or you have to have a good concept. But if you have an actor that you say, well, it was well known 20 years ago, it's not gonna work. And also, just, in today's market, with platforms, I don't defend platforms, but I think, somehow they really changed the market. And also they changed the way of watching films. Now we are more used to watch films from other countries, and we have the choice of putting subtitles or dubbing. So really, it opens our ways of consuming content. So, in any case, you still need to know what the language of your movie is going to be and, what value have those movies in the international market. Again, like I said, 10 years ago, maybe if you would come to me with a Brazilian film, I would think, well, Portuguese, it's just spoken in Brazil, in Portugal, and in some countries in Africa. So there's really not a huge market for Brazilian movies or for movies in Portuguese. That was 10 years ago. Now, definitely you can see that Brazilian films are in a very good position. In the last 2 years, you had one Oscar winner and one Oscar nominee with 5 nominations. So that definitely says something. Also, that it says that your local stars are also international. Today, Wagner Moura is not just a Brazilian actor. It's an international star, really. So that really has changed over the years. I think that, in some way, maybe platforms help, but also it helped that you have, a consistent and growing industry that it's making better movies and bigger movies, and it's positioning them internationally. So you're definitely in a very good moment and position now to sell films from Brazil. And also, the last question you need to ask is, what are your distribution goals? What do you really want with this movie? You want recognition, you want visibility, you want money, or you need money, because, making a movie is really expensive. A feature film especially is very expensive. So sometimes you get the money for your movie from financiers, from investors, and then you have the obligation of recouping that money. So most of the times you really don't recoup from your local market only. You really need, to sell your film internationally. So you're going to need a sales agent. Sometimes you just make a movie with your friends because it's your first film and you just put very few money, and, going to festivals and having that recognition is enough for you, and that's okay too. But again, have in mind what you need for your film, what your goals are. So once you made all these films, you pretty much know where you're standing at, or at least when you make these questions. I said films, sorry. It's very early in the morning, guys. So once you made all your questions for yourself, now you know, at least for you, what kind of film you have. now you have to understand where that film stands in the international market. Now you understand, okay, I have a feature comedy in Portuguese, or I have a feature drama in English or in 2 languages. Sometimes it happens. How is the market responding, or where is this movie standing in the market? So, we need to understand that different territories respond to different things. There's a trend worldwide for horror movies right now, but not maybe horror movies, like slashers, like in the 80s. Now we're talking about more like elevated genre, what they call, like A24 style, these movies that are not really like monsters movies or scary or goosebumps. No, it's more like, intellectual horror. So that's like a trend worldwide. Latin America is responding very well to genre. But in the case of Latin America, not only, elevated genres working, also traditional vampires, zombies, that kind of movie also still work very well in Latin America, because we still have a lot of teenagers going to the theaters. So they consume that kind of movies. Comedies, like I said, on the other hand, are more local. Again, the US imposes their style, and we're all used to watch American comedies. But how many Italian comedies have you seen in theaters or on TV? How many Spanish comedies have you seen? Humor tends to be more local because sometimes it's tied to the language too. How many jokes you get lost in translation, right? So, it all depends on the language, and also we all tend to laugh at different things. Sometimes when it comes to, for example, politics, sometimes you can make political humor and it works very well in Brazil, but maybe, a Chinese or a Japanese won't understand a thing about that and won't find it funny. So, and also, well, that brings us to the second point, cultural proximity. In Latin America, more or less, we have the same, culture, and we understand the language, we understand some of the traditions. There might be differences, but we are closer between Argentina and Brazil than what we can be to Japanese culture, right? As much as we like it, I know Japanese culture is huge and some people love anime, but, our culture is different. So again, that makes a difference. The same thing, in Argentina, I can say that maybe, we are closer to Spanish humor, but maybe not as much to Mexican humor. Even though we're in the same territory, Mexicans have other actors, other accent even. So, it's funny because sometimes we think, well, we live in Latin America, we should, at least for the Spanish-speaking territories, we should all have the same movies. And no, if you really ask me, and if you think, like, honestly, how many, at least, again, in the Spanish-speaking territories, like in Argentina, we don't get to see Mexican movies in theaters. We don't get to see Chilean movies in theaters. Even though it's the same language and pretty much the same culture, we don't get to see those movies. But we get to see maybe more Spanish movies. Again, because of the tradition and all the immigration that we have, we tend to be more connected or more related to Spain than to Mexico, for example. Also, the audience expectations, shaped the market. How many times you are waiting for a movie for months, because you saw a trailer and maybe just a 30-second teaser and it was so good, that people start waiting for that movie and pushing for that movie. And when it comes to, movies that are not distributed by big studios that place your film worldwide, but, more with in the traditional model where you sell, like I said at the beginning, territory by territory, maybe it's an American movie that it's independent and, someone watches the trailer becomes viral online. So a buyer, a distributor from Brazil will come and say, I have to buy this movie because everybody's talking about it in the internet. There's an audience expectation for it. People are expecting to see it in theater, so I'm going to buy it. Also, market sensitivities count, and when I talk about market sensibilities, I mean, for example, censorship. Even though it sounds crazy, there are still a lot of countries out there in the world that have censorship. China is one of the biggest cases. It's a huge market, but their censorship is very strict. And it's also curious, because, for example, you cannot sell movies about ghosts in China, and someone would say, why? Well, because we just don't want to disturb the ghosts. It's tradition for them. You can't, and even if it is, Casper, if it is a movie for kids, you can just not talk about ghosts. You cannot talk about time traveling. So that also, complicates a little bit the distribution of sci-fi movies. And that also has a very political reason, even though it might sound crazy. But if you talk about, if you make a futuristic film, if you make a sci-fi movie about the future, that means that if in the future something is wrong, if there's an apocalypse and the world is destroyed in the future, it implies that we're doing something wrong today. And for such a controlling model like China, you cannot say that they are doing things wrong, right? That the government is doing things wrong. So, avoid time traveling when selling a film to China. Also, if you have a story of a thief, of a sex worker, something that it's not legal, they need to be punished in the film. So I know, this is like very specific, but, again, someone would think, oh, China is such a big market. There are so many opportunities with China. Well, there aren't so many. You have to be very careful with what you do. Or if you intend to sell to China, well, be careful. Also, religious countries, especially in Middle East, Islamic countries are very strict, very, conservative. So avoid selling LGBT stories or very sexual stories. They are not going to buy them in any circumstance. Or even things, sometimes you do tend to think, okay, censorship only applies to adult films, well, for kids, it's easier. No, it's not. And I'm going to tell you a funny story. If any of you have seen Arca do Noé, the Brazilian movie, it happened to me when I was working with that movie that I don't remember exactly which country it was, but it was maybe Middle East. It was a very conservative country. I can't remember now. But someone told me that they were going to have censorship issues because the character of the lion looked like a dictator. He was like trying to impose his will, and being like very rude. And I was like, come on, it's a kids movie. Well, yeah, but they don't want, kids to see characters like that. Not because they defend democracy, on the other way, because, they have dictators in power and they don't want these characters to be shown as the bad ones, So again, you have to be, you don't really need to know all of this ahead of doing your movie, but just, if you think your movie has a potential in certain territories, because, I don't know, like I said before, you think your movie has potential in China because it has a story that takes place in Brazil, but it's connected to Chinese culture, or you have a Chinese actor or something. Well, if you think you have a potential there, just research a little bit what China is looking for and what issues you can face. And one other thing that influences international distribution, of course, is festival recognition. That doesn't mean, again, that, all movies that win festivals will make money. But in certain territories, like in France, for example, if you have the Palme d'Or winner, the winner of the Festival of Cannes, well, of course, that changes. In France, it's going to make a big difference. It might make a difference in some countries that are very cinephile and follow those trends. But for example, if you win San Sebastian Film Festival, it might only make sense for Spanish distribution, but maybe here in Brazil, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Or it's always nice to have the laurels of winning a festival, but in terms of a real business, sometimes not all festivals make a difference, but sometimes some of them they do. So these are all things that even though knowing which kind of film you have, markets will respond differently to these movies. So just to summarize a little bit what I said, the international strategy doesn't depend only on having a good film. It depends on positioning, in understanding where your project fits, who connects with, and how it can travel internationally. Because, like it says there, positioning often shapes the opportunities of the film before even audiences watches it. Like, again, you just see a trailer, and when the trailer is really good, you can tell in 30 seconds, in 1 minute, which kind of movie it is, right? Like, who's gonna watch it, or if you wanna watch it, if it is a movie for all audiences, or if it's just a movie for intellectuals. So again, if you understand very well the positioning of your film, you already know which the opportunities are gonna be. Any questions so far? Because I feel like I'm talking a lot and maybe it's a lot of information. If it's not interesting, let me know too. Okay, so now we're gonna talk, like I said, about the different distribution paths. Hold on. I think I'm going a little fast. So, since you have to understand which film you have, there is no one-size-fits-all international strategy, right? You can do 20 films in your career, and all of them will have a different distribution strategy. Because, again, there's no path to success, and each project needs something different. So understanding, again, I'm going to insist a lot on positioning. Understanding which kind of film you have will shape the opportunities of this film. I'm going to talk more about this later, but sometimes, we tend to think, okay, I work very well with this sales agent. I'm going to give my next movie to them. And sometimes it's not the best decision. You might have a very good relationship with one distributor or sales agent because they made a very good job for one of your films, but that doesn't mean that they're going to do the same with your next film, because they might work very well with animation, they might work very well with comedies, but not with festival movies, right? Not with dramas. So again, there's no one size fits all. So you have to find your own strategy. So I'm going to talk in general about two different distribution models, because going to festivals is also a distribution strategy, right? So like I said before, I know this has been promoted as a workshop about international sales, but I want to talk a little bit about short films as well, because young filmmakers, students, are always starting by making short films. We all started making short films. So it's also good to understand what kind of opportunities or what it means distribution when we talk about short films. Because in general, like I said, there are two models, or at least one for feature films and one for short films. So when we talk about, distributing feature films, that model is often sales-driven, because, like I said, to make a movie, you need a lot of money. So you need to recoup that money. So you often depend on selling your movie to recoup that money. But when it comes to short films, as like I said before too, you don't get a lot of chances to selling it, but you get to distribute it in festivals. This can also apply to, for example, documentaries. Documentaries sometimes, unless you have a big one, with a very international topic or something, if you have smaller art house documentaries, it's always hard to sell those, but you can make a very good festival strategy for those. And at the end of the day, a good festival strategy, even for a short film or a documentary or a more art house oriented film, gives you visibility and positioning, not only for the movie, but also for the creator. Sometimes, you make a great short film and, you position yourself as a great filmmaker, and that opens the door for you for your next project. But when we talk about selling for feature films instead, the goal is focusing on territorial licensing, on selling as many territories as we can, because at the end of the day, what we want to make is revenue. We want to make money out of these sales. But when we are on a festival circuit for a short film, for example, our goal is more focused on audiences, on reaching audiences and building your own career. Feature films are more related. No, what's the word? Well, feature films rely more on sales agents, distributors, platforms, anyone who can actually put money on your film. But when it comes to short films and festivals, you rely more on curators, programmers, people who will watch your movie and decide where to put it or not. Even online distribution can be a model for short films. We can talk about that later. So when it comes to feature films and this traditional model of selling, this commercial cycle is really long. It can take up to 15 years, really. I know it's getting shorter now. You can tell me, but today you see a movie in theaters and in 3 months you will see that in a platform. That's true. That used to be longer. That used to be like you used to watch a movie in theaters and maybe after a year you saw it on TV. Today, platforms are really pushing to have films as faster as possible on their services. But, traditional distributors are still pushing to keep those theatrical windows longer. But in any case, let's say it can take between 3 months and 1 year for a movie to be from theaters to platforms or TV, and then maybe 1 year more since you see that movie in free TV, in the free channels. Then, that movie goes to maybe AVOD. AVOD is the free streaming platforms. So, and then, those rights expires and you have the right to recoup those rights and sell them again. So you can do a second run of selling it to platforms or to TVs. So overall, that entire cycle can take up to 10 years, usually 15 in the best scenarios that it's getting shorter, but it's really a long cycle. Instead, when talking about short films that depend more on festivals, the festival cycle is no longer than 3 years, and in the best scenario, in a real scenario, festival circuit is around 1 year, 1.5 years, no more than that. So I'm saying this because, again, as much as my experience comes more from selling and making feature films, or selling feature films, I know that short films, or I learned over the years that short films are also important, and that someone needs to, share this experience and, and let filmmakers know that sending your film to festivals is also a strategy that you have to plan. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So what can a short film be used for? Short films are primarily designed for 4 things, I would say. One is building visibility, like I said, showing your films in your short film in festivals, winning awards, getting industry recognition. Many careers, like important careers, recently started from short films. Here in Latin America, we have the case of Andy Muschietti and Fede Alvarez. They both made short films in the case, and for them, it was more like online how they work. They send their films to festivals, but really they connected online with people. They became viral. In the case of Andy Muschietti, who is the director of It, he made the short film Mama. Guillermo del Toro watched it, loved it, and, that's how his career started. He invited, or he, proposed him to do a feature film out of Mama. So that's also another thing that, that it's like this next step on this slide, which is launching a future project, So with a short film that was Mama, that was very good, it was very successful, and it was just 1 minute long, really. It was pretty much a video minute, but it was so good and so shocking that out of that concept, they made a movie. So also a short film can be the proof of concept of a bigger project. It can be your chance of doing a little bite of what you're gonna do on a feature. So you get, a little taste for distributors or for investors to see what you're gonna do in a bigger project. Also, maybe you want to, your goal or what you want to do with your short film is reaching audiences only, becoming viral. There are products today that were basically born online, and especially when talking about animation. Like I said before, I also have a lot of experience working with animation. And there are IPs like Simon the Cat, maybe, that you saw online, that this short films about this cat, that it's always nasty. And Simon the Cat is property that born online and became viral online, and now you can find even t-shirts, for Simon the Cat. They never went to cinemas or to festivals or anything. Also, Marcel the Shell, I don't know if you ever saw those short films or the feature film. That was a short film that went very well on festivals, but then they made like 3 more sequels to that short film. And they just put them online. They became viral. So A24, the US distributor, saw the potential on that IP and bought it to make a movie. And that movie ended up being an Oscar nominee for Best Animated Feature. So again, maybe your goal, is to create a community, to engage, an audience online. Or maybe your goal is to explore artistic expression. Sometimes, we have a very niche audience. Sometimes we want to do something very experimental, and, we want to try a technique that is very experimental, or we want to, especially with new technologies, like I said, like animation, you want to try something new. So you're not gonna dare to do a whole feature film with a new experimental technique. So you do a short film, and that short film then opens you the door for something bigger or for something different. Not everything has to turn into a feature film. Sometimes, short films can turn into installations. Again, in today's market, with all the technologies that we have, we have virtual reality, we have XR, like augmented reality. So sometimes, you develop a little short film with a little technique, with a little experience, for the audience. And then, you can turn that into a bigger experience that will take place with a headset for VR, or you will take that experience to an auditorium, to a museum, something like that. So really, short films can be, as much as I said before, that they can't make a lot of money, but they can open you doors for bigger things, so they really have a value. It might not be an economic value, but they have an artistic value, and they give you opportunity of building a career out of those short films. So those 4 are like the main goals or the main paths when making a short film, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow just one. One is dominant, but at the end of the day, you can both make, reach an audience and have a new IP, with that. And actually, to install an IP, you really need an audience, because that's also something important for you to know. In today's market, you might have a great idea, but, producers, especially in Hollywood, are looking for numbers, unfortunately. And when I say numbers, I say numbers from social media, from social engagement. When you try to sell a project with a big actor or with a talent attached, before they ask you in which movies that actor was, or, how is its track record, or how many tickets has his latest movie sold, they will ask you how many followers they have on social media. And you might have a big actor who is not really, unless it's Leonardo DiCaprio or something, DiCaprio doesn't really have a big online presence, but it's DiCaprio, But today, if you have to choose between an actor who is very good, but it's not that known and does not have presence on social media, and some influencer that has millions of followers, unfortunately, many times studios or, like big producers will go to the one that has the big numbers, the one that sells. So that's something also important for you to know. If you're trying to install an IP, if you're going to do something like, like I mentioned, Marcel the Shell or Simon the Cat, yes, it might be a great idea. It might be very funny, but the studios are going to ask you, okay, how many views does this character have online? How big is your Instagram or TikTok account? So to build something, you need to build numbers as well. Okay, so like I said, a festival, doing a festival circuit is to also doing a distribution strategy. And so you have to be very careful on which decisions you have. Before we go into this, I will tell you that in the next blog, we're going to talk specifically about international sales. And I always suggest when you have a feature film that you rely your festival strategy on your sales agent, because they know better what to do with your film and what it's gonna make more sense in terms of sales. Like I said before, if you win Cannes or if you win San Sebastian, that will mean that your film might sell more in some territories. Festival strategy is something that you usually have to think with your sales agent. But if you don't have a sales agent, or if you're not planning to have a sales agent, if you don't need a sales agent, or if you just have a short film and you want to do the distribution yourself, you have to plan this strategy yourself. Also, I'm going to give you one more tip that I think it's important. There are international distributors for short films. This doesn't mean that if you have a short film, you will have to do all the work yourself. There are companies that specialize on distributing short films in festivals, and sometimes they can even make sales for those short films. So that's also something that you have to bear in mind. But the thing is that you need a budget for that. If you're planning to work with a distributor for a short film, you will have to pay them, to make this strategy and to submit the film, the short film or the whatever you have, to film festivals. So again, there are many distribution paths. My goal here is to let you know that you can still make your own festival strategy if you consider the things that I'm going to tell you. So there's an early phase, which is usually the first year of distribution on festivals. That is, it's the early phase that is focusing on building visibility and industry recognition. It's the strongest, part of the circuit, of the festival circuit. And when you talk about, the first part of your festival circuit or your festival strategy, you have to think where you're going to have your premiere. And this also applies for feature films, where you have your world premiere, which is the first time your film is going to be seen, your feature or your short film is going to be seen worldwide. You really have to be very careful, because the biggest festivals will always ask for a world premiere. Like Cannes won't accept anything that it's not the first time that it's being seen. But also when you are planning your strategy, like I said before, you have to remember your positioning. Is my film really going to be selected in Cannes? Unfortunately, very few get selected. I mean, from Latin America, the percentage is less than 10. So it's really low. I know all of us think, I want my film to be in Cannes, but the reality is that very few make it. And that doesn't mean your film is not good. It just means that, it's not for Cannes. There are thousands of festivals out there. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. But again, what you need to know is what kind of film you have and what is the best festival for your film to be premiered. If you have a genre film, it might be better for you to be in Sitges, the biggest genre film festival, which takes place in Spain in October. So if you have an animation, the best place to be is Annecy in France now in June. So knowing what kind of film you have will shape your opportunities on festivals as well. But be aware that how your world premiere will shape the rest of your way in festivals. And also will give you a lot of press, exposure. If you get a premiere in a big festival that gives recognition to your short film, you will get press, you will get exposure, and that will all help not only for your festival to continue its circuit, but also for you to build a career around it. So usually, like I said, for this strongest part of the circuit takes 1 year. For the second year of your circuit, the later phase, you're trying to reach new audiences. You're trying to give a longer life to your short films. So you start focusing on regional festivals. Once you did the big festivals internationally, you go locally. You go to Brazil and you do all your local festivals. You also go to niche festivals, right? As much as I said before that sometimes it's best for you to start on a niche festival. If you have a good animation, you want to start in Annecy, that's also an option. But sometimes there are smaller animation festivals, so you want to do those secondly, right? And also community screenings are important. Sometimes you have short films or even documentaries or even feature films that connect very well on certain topics, on certain, educational matters, or that can open discussions. Sometimes you can have a film that, you can put in schools or universities, like I said before, to talk about certain things. But again, you will do all of this kind of distribution on your second phase, once you already showed your films in the big places. So what you have really, I don't want to extend a lot on festival strategy, because I know it's not really my field of expertise and you came here to hear about sales. I just want you to understand that it's also a strategy, that it's also a possible path of distribution, and that it's also something that you need to plan. Because a successful festival strategy doesn't mean that you have to apply to thousands of festivals or to get selected in thousands of festivals. You have to understand, being successful in festivals means that you understand how your film will travel internationally, that you will understand the priorities when submitting your film, that you will submit it maybe to 20 festivals, but 20 festivals that you selected and that you really believe that have to do with the profile of your film. Because it's very also common, start submitting, your film everywhere, and then all of a sudden it doesn't get selected anywhere. So it's frustrating and that happens because you don't understand the positioning of your film. So understanding the positioning of your film and selecting which festivals you will submit it to will give you more chances of succeeding. Any questions? Yes.
Where can you find it, mate?
You mean find them, know which kind of festivals?
Yes. Is there any specific place we could look for that?
Well, when you are submitting films to festivals, there are platforms like Film Freeway and, oh my God, Film Depot, I think it's the other one, like big platforms where you already put all, you pay a fee and you upload your screener, you upload your materials. And there you have a calendar of festivals, so you can really, research a little bit. Like most of the big festivals have, submission through these platforms. So if you already have your film there, which I suggest because it's easier, you don't have to be, sending your screener everywhere or filling, the form every time you submit. You just do it once, you pay a little fee monthly. And also you have the chance to access, a big database of festivals and know when their submission starts, what deadlines they have. I think that's a very good way to learn the niche festivals around there. But also today, internet, is our biggest ally. So sometimes people tend to think that, to understand how the market works, you have to be in every market or in every festival. Like you have to be like physically everywhere to see what's going on. But really what I suggest to everybody is like, just subscribe to newsletters of the main media like Variety, Screen Daily, the big, in Latin America, you have Latam Cinema, these big portals or magazines, online magazines specialized in cinema. All of them have newsletters. If you subscribe, just by reading the headlines, you will get a taste of what's going on in the market worldwide, because you will see headlines like this movie just won this festival, and even, for example, when you subscribe to Variety newsletter, you can actually choose which kind of news are of your interest. So you can choose festival news, and they will send you all the headlines on festivals. So that's a way of, being updated every day and reading what's happening out there. And that will help you not only to know the festivals, because you will see, it win a prize in Zagreb, it win a prize in Hiroshima. You will start knowing which festivals are out there, and you will also start learning which films are being successful, so you can have comms. Because, one of the things that I mentioned when I talked about positioning is comparing your film to others. So if you start seeing which films are being successful out there, you will have more comms when it comes to your own film. So again, have internet as your main ally for everything and know how to use it. Again, it's not like I said, it's not like submitting your film everywhere. So it's knowing where to go and read the news and understand, which kind of news you want to read. There's no really a golden rule, or there's no one manual for festivals. You also have Cinando, which is a big database. Cinando is the online database built by the Marché du Film, by Cannes. So most of the festivals and companies, production companies, sales agents, distributors are registered on this database. I think it has an annual fee I'm not sure, 300 euros. Okay. Yes. Usually when you enroll for a festival, you get a free subscription for Cinando. For example, if you go to Ventana Sur, you get 6 months free of Cinando. If you have to pay for it, you have to pay a 3 month fee. But that's also a very useful tool because it's a database, and you can filter and find, festivals. So you can start researching which festivals you have and who to contact. Because, also one important thing that I didn't mention, but I think I did at the beginning, when you're planning a distribution strategy for festivals, you still need a budget. Even if you're not hiring a distributor to do this job for you, you need a budget to pay the subscriptions to all these festivals. But sometimes, this is something like a little tip that you need to know. If you are a short filmmaker and you are starting your career, and especially you come from Latin America and you want to submit your film to a European film festival that has a fee in euros and it's expensive, maybe you can find the name of some programmer and send an email and say, hey, it's my first short film, and if you don't mind, could you give me a waiver? The waiver code, it's, to avoid paying the fee. And sometimes, these people, these programmers, said like, yeah, we're going to give the waiver. So maybe you start avoiding paying 50 euros, 100 euros. It's also a way of doing your strategy. And you get to find these contacts if you have a subscription to Sinando, mainly. I don't know if that responded your question. Good.
Thank you.
There's another question there.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, good morning. In your experience, do you find a harder time distribution in documentaries and the fiction films?
Yes, in my experience, I do, because I don't have a lot of experience in documentaries. I work mainly with feature films and animated feature films. But yes, I mean, if you ask me, there are less companies that specialized on documentaries. And if you see out there are a lot of documentaries going to festivals. There are a lot of documentaries on Netflix too, but they have a very specific profile. It's not the same kind of documentary, the one you watch on a festival and the one that is successful on a festival, than the one you watch on Netflix. Netflix is basically true crime documentaries. Some music documentaries work as well. But really, if you have a documentary about a social issue, unless it's something, really trendy, now one documentary that I've seen recently on Netflix is Apocalypse in the Tropics, but why? Because, it's a very trendy thing, and it's also talking about Lula and Bolsonaro and how at the end of the day, they are the same, the documentary tries to say, So it's something, and yeah, it's something that it's trending worldwide. Everybody knows these characters. Everybody wants to talk about religion and power and politics. But if you have a documentary about the exploitation of native population or a native town or something, or if you have a documentary about illegal mining, no, Netflix is not going to buy that, but it can do very well in festivals. So there's kind of a contradiction there, because one would say, yeah, but on Netflix there are a lot of documentaries and they trend all the time, and we watch a lot of documentaries on Netflix, but they have very specific topics. So if you ask me, yes, it's hard to distribute documentaries. And also because, like I said before, there are not a lot of companies that specialize on documentaries. And also, if you pay attention to the ones that get a nomination for the Oscars, for example, they also tend to follow a certain trend of topics. It might change year after year, but over the past 5 years, if you pay attention, I think there were every year there was a documentary about Russia and Putin. Every year. Over the past 2 years, there were documentaries about Palestine and the war. And maybe in 10 years, those won't be the trending topics, and maybe, that the Oscar nominees will be about the extinction of certain animals or global warming, Again, I think the documentaries that sell or that can be easily distributed are the ones that have a friendly approach, an easy approach. When I say friendly, I'm not saying, that they have to be cute, but, an easy approach to the audience with topics that we are all talking about. But if you want to do something more experimental, and when I say experimental, I don't mean, something that it's not understandable, but, you don't want to do the traditional narrative of talking heads. If you don't want to do something more authorial, if you want to do, for example, recently I saw a documentary in Argentina that it's doing pretty well, that it's called December, and it's all footage of the crisis, in 2001 Argentina had a big crisis, a big political and economical crisis. 40 people died on the street because of the police violence and everything. That made big changes in our government and everything. And so this guy made this documentary that it's truly amazing, all with footage from TV. You don't see any interviewers. You just see people talking from the TV, really. If you ask me, the documentary is amazing. But if I have to show it to someone who has no idea what happened in Argentina and who doesn't care, really, you don't really have to care about all the worldwide problems, it's not going to work, Maybe it can be amazing and it can win a lot of awards in Argentina, but it's not easy for someone who doesn't understand the story. Maybe if you take the same topic and make it in a more traditional way and you put a voiceover saying, in 2001 in Argentina, there was a big crisis, maybe it ends up going to Netflix. Maybe, because you have a more traditional narrative. But if you want to do something like this, just put the images out there and let people understand what they understand. It's not going to be sellable. It can work in your territory, but it's not going to have international appeal. So trying to summarize, yes, it's harder to distribute documentaries than feature films. Anything else? Yeah.
Hi, good morning. I have a question about sales agents. How do they select the films that they're going to work with?
We're gonna get into that in the next block.
Okay.
Sorry, it's a whole slide, so we're gonna get into that.
Okay.
No worries. So, okay, we're good with the time. So, one last thing I want you to have in mind. I say when it comes to distributing short films, but it's in general when it comes to doing another path that it's not necessarily selling. We make some mistakes. The first mistake is having an unclear positioning. I will repeat this 1,000 times, really, but you really need to understand what kind of movie you have. Because again, if you don't understand which kind of movie you have and you just want to be in Cannes and your movie is not for Cannes, you're going to get frustrated. So identify the movie that you have and its distribution potential, where it can go, so you don't fail in this path. Also, something that I already said, a common mistake is applying everywhere without a strategy. You start submitting your film everywhere, and that's also something that can happen easily when you are in these platforms like Film Depot or Film Freeway. You tend to say, oh, this one is free, I'm going to apply here. And you start applying to all the festivals that don't charge you for a fee. And those usually are not serious festivals. I'm not saying that all festivals that don't charge you for a fee are not serious, but something that I actually heard from programmers and directors of film festivals is that they actually have to charge a small fee in their festivals for it to become more serious or for people to take it seriously. Because there are so many festivals that don't charge fees and people start submitting everything. And if you don't put a little fee, people don't even read what kind of film this festival accepts. So, for example, I was just talking to the director of Big Bang, which is the biggest animated short film festival in Buenos Aires. And she was telling me I had to start charging a little fee because people were sending me any kind of short films. They didn't even read the rules. They didn't even read that it's a festival only for short films, animated short films. So I was starting to receive horror short films, live action. So they had to charge a little fee because of that. So it's very tempting when you're in these platforms to start submitting your film everywhere, but that's not really a strategy. What if you get selected in a festival and, like I said before, you lose your world premiere just by sending it to any first random festival that accepts you? You really kill the opportunity of your film, even short film, feature, whatever it is. You kill the opportunity to be to a bigger festival. So please again, bear in mind that the world premiere is very important and that you need to have a strategy. What you're going to do next after your world premiere. Where is your path going to start? Also, an important thing to think is that you don't necessarily need to focus on festivals. Again, there are IPs, there are films that start their career straight online, straight outside of the festivals. Not all films need to go to festivals. I mean, I'm not saying festivals are not good. I'm just saying that in today's world, there are so many windows, there are so many opportunities for films to be seen that going to festivals might not be the best for your film or might not be necessary. Because at the end of the day, festivals give you recognition in the industry. Of course, we're not going to deny that. But who goes to festivals? Just people who are really interested in films, really. I mean, if you are doing something maybe for kids or teenagers, if you have, the goal of installing an IP for teenagers don't go to festivals. Teenagers are on TikTok. And that's something that I keep saying, I don't like TikTok. I don't understand TikTok. For me, it's really, it's like drug. But honestly, young audiences and even adults are there. So if you have something that has the potential to be viral, and then you have the opportunity to go to a studio and say, hey, this has become viral. Now I want this character to be, in a movie or something. Again, maybe your best path is to go to platforms. What I'm saying is don't fight against new formats. Embrace them. I don't like vertical formats. I think it's anti-cinematic, honestly. But it's working. People are consuming those kind of contents today. So what shall we do? Being like, all grumpy people saying like, oh, I hate TikTok, I hate this format, or embracing them and bringing our narratives, bringing, what we know, bringing our cinematic style to those kind of formats and making better content in a format that it's working and in a format that it's, attracting people's audience attention. Because again, if you make something that it's successful on TikTok and then you go and sell that idea to make a movie, you're gonna definitely have or probably have a very successful movie. Look what is happening to Backrooms, the horror movie. Backrooms started pretty much as a meme on 4chan. Someone posted this photo and people start telling or making up stories about the Backrooms, and all of a sudden we have a 20-year-old YouTuber producing and directing a horror movie that it's very successful. But it all started on the internet. The guy wasn't there saying like, hey, I want to be in a festival and I want to get the recognition of the industry. No, they just started, doing things online. So maybe today what we have to do is that, against the fighting, we have to embrace this new format. So again, do not focus only on festivals. Think what is best for your film, for your goals with that film. Also, a very common mistake is not have a long-term plan. Like I said before, if you don't know where your film is going to be, if you don't know what it's going to be your premiere, if you just accept the first invitation from the first festival that selects your movie without a strategy, you are killing a lot of opportunities. So think, okay, I know it's hard sometimes because, that's also another question that I usually hear. It's like, okay, but what if I submit my film to Tribeca? And in the meantime, I get the confirmation of other festival. What should I do? Well, sometimes you have to take a strategic decision. If you are waiting for a confirmation from Tribeca, but in the meantime, Miami Film Festival calls you, first off, I would say do not submit your movie to Miami if you are waiting a confirmation of Tribeca. Why I'm putting this example? Because we're talking about the US, we're talking about 2 US festivals. Tribeca, it's a main one, even though it's not A-list, but it's a main festival. and Miami, it's a, second line festival. It's cool, it's nice, but it's second line. But sometimes, also programmers, it doesn't depend only on you. Sometimes programmers call you and say like, hey, I want to have your film. So again, you submitted your film. Let's say it's your second or third movie. So festivals already know you, so they are waiting for your movie. So you probably, before you start submitting it to festivals, you will start getting invitations from programmers. So you're waiting for a confirmation from Tribeca, which takes place, I think, in June. And Miami, that takes place in April, asks for your film. No programmer will ever get mad at you if you say no, really. I mean, programmers understand, or should understand, that your film, that you have a strategy, so you can say, okay, thank you, I appreciate your invitation, but I can give you my film next year, And maybe then Tribeca doesn't select you. Well, it's a shot in the dark. You have a strategy. You're aiming for Tribeca. If you accept Miami before Tribeca, Tribeca is not going to accept you. That's for sure. But if you leave the door open, you still have the chance to show your film in Miami next year and have your premiere in Tribeca as you planned. So you have to think strategically. That's the thing, that's the key point. And also, one last thing that it's important, and this applies for everything, not only for festivals, but also we're going to talk later when talking about how to approach a sales agent and everything and all that. Have good communication materials, please. When submitting your film to a festival or to a sales agent, have a good screener, good quality screener. Have English subtitles. You don't really need to have subtitles in all the languages. With English subtitles, it's already enough. Have a good synopsis, because also this is something, important to know. Film festivals receive lots of submissions. So sometimes, the way you present your film, if you have a weak, bad written synopsis, if you have a bad poster, if you don't have a nice still to present your movie when you submit it, that's one first filter. If they have to choose among 1,000 movies and they receive something that it's not well presented, it's not professionally presented, you're already, getting stopped in the first filter. So really have very good communication materials, have a good screener, have a nice presentation, have a press kit. A press kit is kind of some pages where you put together your synopsis, your director's statement, your director's biography, because all of those are materials that festivals will need afterwards. For if your film gets selected, they will ask you for a director's bio, a good picture. That's also important. Please send good pictures, not only good stills, but also professional pictures of directors. Even though if you have, a cool, relaxed style, have a professional picture of yourself. Don't send a selfie. It's not, you're not only selling your movie, you're selling yourself, you're selling your career, your professionalism. So have a nice picture for when you are asked, to submit your film. All of these things really count because, like I said before, it's not only about the quality of the film, it's also about the positioning. So positioning yourself as something, someone serious and professional, it's also part of this package. So I think we're ready for the break. Well, we still have 15 minutes, right? So if you want to do questions, we really have 15 minutes before the break is ready. So feel free to do all your questions and then get ready, have some nice rest because we're going to go full into international sales after this vlog. Any questions?
Hi. Hello, Florencia.
Yes, yeah.
When it comes to development labs and funds, sometimes they ask us for like a distribution strategy. So my question is, what do you suggest? Less is more in this case, because sometimes we don't have like a clear vision of the project when we are in development. So what would you suggest to respond to this?
Well, I think that has to do, it's an interesting question because really I see, most of the funds are asking for that. And to be honest, the responses I'm seeing, I've been working a lot as a jury and mentor on funds. And I see that lots of people tend to copy and paste things told by ChatGPT when it comes to distribution strategy. So it's good to have a little idea of what to do. I think you have to be honest. You have to understand your positioning, ask the questions that I said at the beginning, and that will give you at least goals. Maybe you can't put on your distribution strategy, I will work with this company, but you can say, understanding that, this film is for kids, or this film is for teenagers, or this film will have, better life in festivals. Our goal is to go to these kind of festivals or to present the film to these companies. It's doing a little, in the next blog, we're going to talk specifically about sales agents. So we're going to learn, how to, or who are the best companies to find, or how to find the best companies for your project. But I think that, if you follow these steps of understanding the positioning of your film, understanding which goals or which real opportunities your film can have, you can write an honest text saying all of these things. And that will be more valuable than saying, I'm going to send my film to this festival, or I'm going to go to this market, because that's something that I also see a lot in distribution strategies, saying we're going to go to this market and to this festival, and markets and festivals are not the same thing. That's something that we said at the beginning. So, I see a lot of people saying, I'm going to go to these places. What for? What are your goals if you're going to these markets, or why do you want to go to these festivals? So I think, and this is something very personal, I rather read someone, writing something honest about, understanding where their film stands and which possibilities it can have. And then, maybe you can say, okay, I would suggest, or I will try to submit my film to these companies. But I think that's the best way to really write a distribution strategy when you still don't have anything, because then things can change, in between. You're submitting your film to a fund or something, and you're lucky, and I don't know, Netflix comes in and buys everything, and you don't need a strategy. Netflix will do everything for you. So, but in the beginning, I think you really need to understand your positioning and talk about that, and talk about the opportunities you can have, understanding what kind of film you have. I think that's more than enough. And because also, people that reads that, it's people like me, it's not that it's gonna be, nobody has the right answer for a distribution strategy. So I'd rather read something from someone who has really made their homework, and research and understands what kind of film that they have, rather than someone who asks ChatGPT, give me a distribution strategy. So I hope that, I don't know if that responds your question. You're welcome. Anything else?
Se alguém tiver pergunta em português, a Florencia tem um fone ali para tradução em inglês, tá, gente?
Hi. In your experience, how many films actually make money? And I define making money by paying its costs and a small 10% margin.
Honestly, very few. I mean, you can recoup some money. Sometimes you are lucky and you recoup all of your money. And sometimes you lose. Many times you lose. There's no really, it's a really hard question, because sometimes, some films start very well. When it comes to international sales, there are like 2 stages to make money. We're going to talk about that later too. But, first off, you have advances, you have MGs. So you have the money that distributors put upfront on your film, and that's money that you get secure as a distributor. And no matter what happened then as a producer, no matter what happened then with the film, you already received your money. So if a film fails with the distributor, you already have your money. But that money never recoups. I mean, it's never enough to recoup the entire budget, or usually you need a combination of advances and box office and revenue after, and money that comes from the sales that the distributor makes to TVs, to streamers. And sometimes, and most of the times, or many times really, that fails because, sometimes you have films that make a lot of money in advances, or many times you have films that make a lot of money in advances. But then when it comes to distribution in each particular territory, there are a lot of factors that get there, involved. And, for example, from the films that I showed there, I think the most successful one was Loving Vincent, the Van Gogh biopic. And it's probably the most difficult one. If you see that list, it's the most difficult. Who would be interested in a Van Gogh biopic, painted in oil? But it's so original, that it made very good money in advances, and it also worked very well in the box office. But the market was different when that movie was released. That was 10 years ago. So today, very few films really make money in the box office, independent films. I'm not talking about, studios or big distributors like A24, because when we talk about backrooms, we're really talking about an independent film, but an independent film that it's supported by a big US distributor, that it's pretty much like being supported by a studio. So, but really, only really big films, studio films, make a lot of money. And also, it's not also something that I also said before, it's not only about the film that you have, it's also about the promotion and how much money you invest in the marketing. That's really important, because sometimes you have a great film, but you have to compete against Toy Story 5, and you have Disney, putting a lot of money, and you might have a great animation for kids and you release it, because one thing that you also hear a lot is you don't want to compete against Toy Story. Yeah, but Toy Story is always released in the best time of the year for kids to go to a theaters. Disney always releases their films in summer holidays, winter holidays, and the rest of the distributors that have animations for kids will want to compete in the same time, So what shall you do there? You have to do your best. And yeah, but if you ask me, yes, not like very few films really recoup and make money. I think that if you recoup, you are already winning, because again, you are investing a lot of money. If you get to recoup, you should be happy already. If you get to make money, well, you are really lucky. I will try to sum up this response with something that I heard from a teacher in film school. He said, making films is fun, but it's very expensive. It's not really a profitable business. If you have the money and you want to make money, get into real estate. But it's not as funny or as fun or as interesting as making movies, really. I mean, I don't want to make buildings. I know I would make more money, but I won't get to go to Cannes and have fun. I put this picture because, that's part of what Cannes is, having drinks and meeting people and enjoying in the beach. You don't get that in the real estate business, really. Sometimes you do, but it's not the same. You don't get to see Hollywood stars or anything. So, and actually there are a lot of people, like rich people, who made money in real estate and then put it in, bet it a little bit on filmmaking because it's fun. I hope that responds to your question. Okay. One question? One more? Two. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I start apologizing for my English.
It's fine. If you want to do it in Portuguese, we have...
No, I think I would like to try.
That okay.
Well, if I'm producing cheese and I'm trying to sell it, the first thing I would like to do would be go in a bakery and ask for its owner, like, what kind of cheese you sell better and the most here, and what your clients would like the most. And I think mainly here we talk very few about this relation within distributors and producers with the as exhibitors.
Yes.
Well, I would like to ask you about what are the best practices, and if there are any, in this international.
I see. I get it. Okay. So somehow you're asking about making films for the market, right? Like you actually don't want, or you're not trying to really make a movie for yourself or your taste or the audience that you think. You're trying to make something that responds to the demand of the market. I think, that's a way of thinking filmmaking. That's the way that most of the studios and Netflix even works. You know, if you ask how Stranger Things was born from an algorithm saying, hey, people like fantasy, 80s stories with 80s music, kids, E.T., on those movies, Steven Spielberg movies, and that's how they made Stranger Things, and it was a huge success. We, as independent producers, we have, and also, considering the production models that we have in Latin America, we have the freedom of pretty much doing more what we want. This is a very personal response, honestly. I think, you can do movies responding to the needs of the market. But I think when we go into the next blog that it's specifically about international sales, we will talk about a little bit about what sales agents want. And I think there are companies for pretty much all kinds of movies. The thing is that you have to find the one that it's the right seller for your kind of movie. If you have a horror film and you are trying to give it to, or to have a company selling your movie, the company that it's selling the Palme d'Or winner in Cannes, well, maybe they are not interested in genre movies. Maybe their buyers or their clients are looking for more sophisticated dramas. That doesn't mean that your horror movie is not sellable. It's just that you have to find a company which clients are looking for that kind of films. I don't know if that responds exactly to your question. We're going to go more into detail about that. But I think, you can always do movies for the market, and you can find a company that it's looking for those movies. Well, are we ready? Did you have a good break? So now we're going to go into the toughest part, which is actually your international sales strategy, if international sales are part of your strategy. Up to now, we said there are many ways to distribute your film internationally. So if you realize that you need a sales agent and that you need to make sales on your film, let's talk about that. Oops. Like I said, for some projects, it's like really a key part of their strategy to sell the movie. So let's see what are the important things to understand when selling your film. So what's the role of a sales agent? Like I said at the beginning, a sales agent is a company that represents the rights of your film internationally and puts it again in front of the eyes of the buyers that will do the domestic or the local distribution in their territories. So what do they do? Well, they create really the strategy for you because, of course, you need to understand what your strategy is, but the expert on your strategy will be your sales agent, and it's good that you rely on them for this. Because they understand very well how to position your project internationally. Again, this doesn't mean that you don't have to know it. You have to know it to find the right sales agent, but they will build the right strategy to put your film in the places that it has to be. So they do the representation, like I said, of your film. They will connect your film with buyers and markets. They will take actually your film to markets, because that's also something that I usually see, producers trying to be in all the markets. If you have a good sales agent, a sales agent that fits your needs, and a sales agent that you rely on, you can rely on your sales agent going to the markets and taking your film for you. Also, they will do the hardest part, which is negotiating the deals for you. They handle the rights, which is actually the value of the films. When we talk about selling films, we're actually talking about selling rights, the right to promote, to distribute, to exploit your film in a certain territory. And they will negotiate all these deals. These deals have a lot of terms. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what terms include the deal that you sign with your sales agent. Bear in mind that there is a contract that you sign once with your sales agent that has a lot of terms that you have to take into account, but then your sales agent enters on your behalf on other deals with the distributors, and they sign on your behalf the terms, for these companies to distribute your film in their territories. So you give them, when you sign the first contract with the sales agent, you give them the ability to enter deals on your behalf, enter agreements on your behalf. And also, of course, they take care of the visibility of your film. They create the opportunities. They take your film to the markets and organize market screenings, because, like I said before, markets are not really festivals. One thing is having your film being seen in a festival, but in markets, there are private screenings only for industry members that have a badge and attend there. And those market screenings have to be paid by someone, and that someone that pays for those screenings is your sales agent. Then we're going to see where they take the money from. But actually, the ones who go and book those market screenings are the sales agents. They also arrange the press for you, right? Because, when you go, when I mentioned, read the trades, like, read the media like Variety and Screen Daily, those medias is not, of course, they have people who are around the market asking for news and trying to learn about the deals. But most of the times it's your sales agent who calls these reporters and tell them, hey, I have this movie, this movie has all these highlights. Let's do an article on your media to promote it. So that's something that also the sales agent has to do, because, like I said, they build an entire strategy to promote your film and to make it profitable. And they give you, of course, industry exposure. And also, they take it to markets, but also negotiate the festival premiere for you. They put the film in the festivals that it has to be. So that's why I said, if you're doing your festival strategy independently, is one thing. But if you decide that you're going to have a sales agent, rely your festival strategy with your sales agent. I'm not saying you have to give them 100% ability to do whatever they want. Of course, having a sales agent, it's also having a relationship with, a partnership. So it's, there has to be dialogue. If they are deciding to put your film in a certain festival, it's always good that you know where they are sending your film and everything. But, if you find a sales agent that you think it's a good fit for your film, you have to rely, on their decision, trust their decisions, because they want the best for your film. So basically, that's the role, or pretty much everything that the sales agent does for you. So I think now I'm going to respond to your question, what a sales agent actually looks for. And this of course, depends on the company. In the same way that I explained that you need to know the positioning of your film, that you need to understand where your film stands in the market, different companies have different positions. They have different profiles. They look for different things. So that's why I said also that not all the sales agents are good fits for all the films. If you see, there are like huge sales agents like Goodfellas, for example, that used to be Wild Bunch in the past. Or in Latin America, you have Film Sharks, and in Spain, you have Latido. Those are really big companies, that we all want to work with those companies because we see that, they put their films on Netflix or in the big festivals. But that doesn't mean that they are a good fit for your film. If you have a smaller film, or if you have a horror movie, like I said before, or if you have an animation film, that doesn't mean that what we think it's the best sales agent is going to be the best for your film. So that's something that sales agents also, they know their positioning, so they try to find their films accordingly to their profile. So, they pretty much ask the same questions that I told you that you have to ask to your own project. So the questions are basically, can I position this project? Is the concept clear? That's something, a sales agent has very few minutes on a meeting to pitch your film, because while they handle your film, they might have 5 other titles. So in a half-hour meeting in a market, they have to present all these films. So the concept has to be very clear. They have to be able to explain which kind of film is, what is it about, what are the remarkable things about the film. Also, is the audience identifiable? It's again, is this a movie for kids? Can I easily tell, I have a film, an animated film for kids. I have a drama, a festival winner drama. They have to understand very clearly what the concept of your film is. And also, if they can place it in the market, is there a demand for this? What place this film fits in the market? So, and, right after that, the question is if they can sell, actually, this project. Is there a demand in the market? Are really audiences looking for these films, or are my clients looking for these films? Because, even though, there are a lot of companies and there are both a lot of sales agents and a lot of distributors, like in every other relationship in life, buyers tend to have more affinity with certain sales agents. Sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's because of their profile. If you buy a certain type of films, you don't go out there to see all the sales agents in the market. You just go and visit the ones that that have the kind of product that you're looking for. So your sales agent thinks, okay, is this something that my buyers are looking for? Does it have marketable elements? What is sellable about this film? Is it the cast? Is it the genre? Is it the technique? Is it the target audience? And also they ask themselves if they can build a strategy around it. Again, is this something that it's going to have more value in festivals? Is this something that it's going to be profitable because it's going to win big festivals? Or is it something that it's going to be more commercial, which is also good? Sometimes you build your strategy around saying this film has been the #1 box office hit in Brazil. So buyers who are looking for commercial films will not look maybe for Cannes Award winners. They will look for films that had a very good local box office in their own territories. Or also, if there's a talent attached, can I sell this? Because, what is going to be my strategy? Well, my strategy might be I have a film with Brad Pitt, and that's enough. And believe me, I've seen things like this. When the Weinstein Company, back in the day, started selling The Hateful Eight by Quentin Tarantino, their strategy was basically they launched the project in AFM in Los Angeles. And the first poster that they had the teaser poster that they had in their booth was a white thing, white square with a little, my God, I never remember the English word for this. La diligencia, la carroza, the vehicle that the Western guys used to have with the horses, and that was it. And it said Quentin Tarantino's 8th movie, The Hateful Eight. That's it. That was their strategy. Nobody knew who the actors were. You could tell it could be a Western because of the style of the image, but nothing else. I mean, they just relied the entire strategy on Quentin Tarantino, and that's it. I'm not saying, I mean, we might not have a Quentin Tarantino movie, probably, among us, but, we can say, well, I have Wagner Moura, I have Tanya, Tanya became a star now. So you can just make, a strategy saying, I have this new movie and it's a comedy. We all know Tanya has potential for comedy. So, you can build a strategy around that and say, for those who don't know her, it's the actress on The Secret Agent, and that's it. And one last question that it's also very important for sales agent is if they can realistically add value to this movie. Will they really bring new opportunities? And that's something also you need to know. He's like, is the sales agent going to add value? Is your movie, having your movie in their catalog is gonna give you more, it's gonna give more visibility, more reliability on your film. And also one important thing that the sales agent has to honestly ask themselves if they are the right partner for this project, right? Because sometimes it happens a lot that sales agents, I mean, it happened to me many times that there are movies that I really like and that I would love to have and that I would love to work with. But, it's like when you honestly ask yourself, like, do my buyers want this kind of movie? It happened to me. I'm going to tell you a real story. Many years ago, I saw a movie called Máteme, por favor, Brazilian movie. Do you remember it? I think it was premiered in Venice. I loved it. I think it was amazing. But, I was working with a company that was selling like very commercial films. And that wasn't a commercial film, really. It was more an art house film. It had a little taste of genre. It did very well in festivals. And they ended up finding a French company that represented them very well. But the company I was working for wasn't really the partner for that movie. That doesn't mean that the movie wasn't good or that we didn't like it as sales agents. It's just that we know who our buyers are and the kind of films that we are selling and the kind of films our buyers are looking for, our clients are looking for. So we cannot take a movie that it's totally out of our profile. I hope that if you have another question, I can't remember your name, sorry. If you want to ask something else about this, good. We're going to keep talking about this, of course. So, on the other side, when you have to choose your right sales agent, again, not every sales agent is the right partner for your project, and not for all projects, because like I said before also, sometimes, we do very well with a sales agent with one movie and we try to push them to, to have our next movie. And sometimes it works because, sometimes there are producers who tend to do festival dramas and that's their profile. So, if they do well with a sales agent that sells that kind of projects, maybe they will take the second project. Maybe, you will bring them as a producer the next film of a director they already work with. So they will be happy to have this movie too. But sometimes, your first production or you have one production that it's, a comedy and your next film it's a movie for kids. So sometimes you cannot just work with the same sales agent, even though you trust them and even though they did an amazing job with your previous film, they can just not take your film. And sometimes even sales agents get confused as well because it's like, oh, I like this producer, I know they are reliable, I'll take their movie. And that's a big mistake. So avoid doing that. Just always try to find the right sales agent for the kind of film that you have. So consider the following things. Oops. There we are. Consider the following things. Sorry, I see that there is like a little problem with the position of the... It's my mistake. But research the catalog of the companies. This is one of the jobs you have to do when trying to find a sales agent. Go and, go to Sinando, go to the media and see which are the companies out there and go to, their pages, their websites, and check what kind of films do this company sell. Like, do they represent films similar to mine? Like, do they have the kind of film that I'm trying to sell? Look also for the genre expertise. Again, if you have a comedy, don't try to put it with someone who sells dramas or mainly dramas. Also, look at the scale of the projects that they have. If they have Quentin Tarantino's movie, they might not want to work with a low-budget movie from a first-time director. Look there for their market presence. Which markets these companies attend? That's also important because sometimes we tend to think, well, the best company has to attend all the markets. And that's not right. I mean, attending markets is also an expense that we're going to see later, that it's also covered by you, even though the distributor advanced some money to attend markets. At the end of the day, something that you end up paying from your own budget. So you don't want a company that just goes to all the markets because it's important to be everywhere. No, it's important to be where your buyers are. So if you have, sorry that I insist pretty much always on the same genres, but if you have a horror movie, horror works pretty well in Asia. If your movie, it's good for the Asian market, see if this company you're trying to reach out to attends the markets in Asia. Maybe you don't need this company to be in Rome, Mia market in Rome, because Mia might be more for Europe, it might be more for art house films. But if you have a movie that has potential in Asia, you need a sales agent that has good presence in Filmart, for example, which is the biggest market in Hong Kong and the main market for Asian buyers. If you have a Latin American film, you definitely need your sales agent to be in Ventana Sur, for example. Also, look at the track record. What happens to the movies? Because this is something that also sales agents tend to hide. If they do well, they will put in their website, oh, we sold it to all these companies, to all these territories. They will actually make press releases about that. You will go to the media and see, this company sold this movie in 30 territories in the first market. But if it doesn't, they won't tell you. So that's something that you will have to find out also. Like, okay, they might have a huge catalog of animated features, but do actually these animated features get sold? Where? So you have to start researching, like, where was this film released? Like, how many sales did they announce? Who took this film? And also, one very important thing is the commitment that the sales agent is going to have with your film. I personally don't trust those companies that have 10 different movies in each market. It's like, and I don't want to give names, but, some of these big companies that I mentioned before tend to change their lineup in every market. So you go to Cannes and they have 10 new movies in Cannes. And that means that probably they go then to Toronto and your movie is already going to be in the catalog. It's not going to be in their lineup. It's not going to be featured with a poster in their booth. They are going to have it already on your catalog because they already have 10 other movies, new other movies. So, and also if they have 10 movies, like I said before, if you have 30 minutes to present your lineup to a buyer, you don't have time really to pay attention to 10 movies. Sometimes it happens that you already know the buyer and you know that there are some of those 10 movies that they might not be interested in, so you skip them. But, I prefer sales agents who have less films, that maybe have 10 films around the entire year. It's not 10 different films in every market. They just have 10. They add 2 more movies for each market. But you make sure that the amount of movies that they have along the year or across the year, it's always like pretty much the same. So, because, you don't get to sell your film worldwide in the first market. It's, a work that takes time. Sometimes, a buyer watches a movie and a film in a market and they like it, but they are not sure, if it's gonna work, or maybe they are about to release a movie that it's very similar, so they are not ready to acquire another movie in the same trend, or maybe they want to wait to see how this movie works, so they buy it in the next market if it is still available. So that's why it's important to have, a sales agent that keeps, reminding you and promoting and pushing your film, during the markets, at least for a year. So, my personal advice is try to find a company that does not have a huge lineup that keeps changing in every single market. So, also another important thing to have in mind, because that's also another question that I keep hearing, is like, when do I approach a sales agent? There are different stages, honestly. One important thing that you have to know or have to bear in mind is that a sales agent, as a definition itself, is not a producer. He's not going to invest money in producing your film. So if you are in early development, you only have a script and you're the producer, and you might have the commitment of an actor, you have a director, but you still don't have any financing for it, or you have, 10% of the financing, it might be a bit early to start a conversation with a sales agent. Of course, it's always good, when you're in markets, and especially in markets like this, that it's not that you have lots of companies and everybody trying to sell. In more relaxed markets, maybe you can start talking about your film in development, because it's good, to start the conversation and start relationships with sales agents. But in reality, the truth is that very few sales agents will get involved in a project when it's in development, because they really don't have the ability to finance your film. So it makes no sense for them. And also, one thing that can change, for example, is that if you already have a relationship with that sales agent that you're trying to sell a film in development, if you already have a long-term relationship, let's say that you already sold 3 successful movies with this company, well, sometimes, the producer knows you, and the producer knows that you will be able to raise the financing, and actually they can even help you sometimes, they can connect you with other producers so you can complete your production strategy and everything. But usually, when you see a company that is selling a film in early development, it's because they trust the producer, and they know that the producer is going to be able to deliver a film. But in general, a sales agent won't get on board when there is no financial or production strategy, because they don't know if they don't know if they can start selling a film that it won't be made. Because what if you fail to raise your financing and they already started, to sign contracts, and then you can't deliver your film? It's a problem for them. So early development might be a tricky or difficult stage to start selling or to start approaching sales agents. I think, the best stages, depending on your projects, are pre-production, production, and post-production. Pre-production is usually the ideal moment, because it is supposed that when you enter pre-production, it's because you already have the financing for your film. So even though you might not be, already shooting your film, but you can tell the sales agent, hey, I have all this funding secured, I have the contracts, I have, everything to prove that I have the money and that I will be able to complete this film in 6 months, 1 year, whatever it takes. And of course, when you are in pre-production, you have the final script, you have, the visual identity of your film, you have your cast. So you have all the elements that a sales agent consider that are good to start, pre-selling, or to take your film and start representing it and start pitching it to buyers. Because be aware that many films get pre-sold. When I say pre-sold, I mean that they get sold before they get made. But to get a film pre-sold, you really need to have a big package of talent attached. You need to have, like I said, the full financing. You need to show it's a solid project. So going back to Tarantino movie, of course they start pre-selling it. They didn't need, it's Tarantino. You don't need to tell people it's going to have this actor or people know that Tarantino is going to deliver a good film. Well, maybe not. Maybe Hateful Eight wasn't my favorite one, but still, people buy it because it's Tarantino. But what if you're not Tarantino? Maybe you cannot rely on that strategy. So maybe the best moment for you to approach a sales agent is when you're already in production. So you're in production and you can actually prove, you can show some footage, even if it doesn't have post-production. You can go to a sales agent and say, hey, I'm already producing this movie. Look at the footage. Looks good. It has quality. And usually, for first-time directors, maybe this is the best time to approach a sales agent, because you can actually show, the kind of movie they can do. Because, you can tell, okay, I have a great script, I have this talent. But if the sales agent doesn't know what's going to be the style of this movie or how it's going to be directed, having all this package or having all this talent attached doesn't mean it's going to be a good movie if the director fails. So maybe, when you are working with a first-time director, going in production and being able to show a little bit of your film, it gives more security to a sales agent. Also, when you have a film that it's very driven on the visuals, if you have a movie that you say, no, it's going to have a very special cinematography, it's going to be very dark, and the sales agent might want to see a little bit of how is that being made, because sometimes you promise something and then you do something that it hasn't the quality that you promised. So again, sometimes it's good, to approach sales agents when you already have something to show. When it's in post-production, I think it's also a good moment, especially for companies that don't do a lot of pre-sales, because, for doing pre-sales, it means that you need to have clients who are willing to somehow bet money on your movie without watching it, right? So for smaller movies and smaller sales agents, maybe the best time is when the movie is already in post-production, because, it's pretty much completed, so they can actually start selling, because, a smaller company also cannot wait 2 years for a movie to be ready, right? Because when you pre-sell, sometimes you start pre-selling 2 years before the movie is completed. So big companies know that in 2 years, they are going to still have, presence, and they are going to be relevant, and they're going to still be in business. That's unfortunately something that is happening a lot. In today's market, companies unfortunately go out of business because of the economic situation. So there are really a big few companies that can rely on saying, okay, I put money here and in 2 years I will have my movie and I will still be in business to pay it, to release it. Smaller independent distributors might want to buy something that it's now completed or close to be completed, so they can release it soon. So post-production, it's a very good stage. And also it's good, when you're in post-production, because you don't have picture log yet. Your movie is not really finished. So it's also good, for the sales agent to see and to have the ability to give you some feedback on the film before it's completed. Because sometimes it happens that you like a movie a lot, you see a lot of potential, but the movie is 2 hours long, 2 hours 15, and although studios are making 3 hours long movies and all that, in reality, it's difficult to place long movies in theaters. Studios can do it because pretty much they own the theaters as well. But for independents, you have to think that the slots in the theaters are 2 hours usually. So if you have a 3-hour movie, an independent, a cinema is going to say, I'd rather have a 3-hour movie I'd rather have the Odyssey, Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, because it's 3 hours long, but it's Christopher Nolan, so I don't care. But I know it's going to be successful, or that's what they expect. But if you have an independent movie, they are gonna tell you, no, I'm not gonna bet a 3-hour. Let's say 1 slot and a half, right? Because you need 2 slots to put a 3-hour movie. So trying not to be too long on this, the sales agent might ask you to shorten a little bit your film. If you have a film that you can still cut 15 minutes, 20 minutes to make it more sellable, it's good that you give the sales agent the opportunity to give you that feedback and tell you, hey, because, serious sales agents might even give you notes and tell you, this is exactly what you need to cut. Also, not because of the length only, but also sometimes it's because of some content. If you have a very strong sex or violence scene, unless it's really necessary for your story, some sales agents might tell you, hey, this movie, has a lot of potential, but with this scene on it, you're gonna, cut out some possibilities. So maybe, if you can soften a little bit this scene or take it out, you might have other chances in more markets. So I know, sometimes it can sound like, hey, why this person is telling me what to do with my film? Sometimes it can be, uncomfortable for us to hear those comments. But bear in mind that the sales agent is your partner and wants the best for your film. So if they give you this advice, it's because they know the market and they know that this can be complicated. And when the movie is completed, it's a bit more difficult. I mean, I see that a lot. And that's also because, it has to do a lot with, coming back to the beginning when I said film schools don't teach distribution. We tend to think, distribution is something that happens at the end. So we wait until the movie is finished and we start going out there. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend start, planning your strategy ahead and start reaching out to buyers before your movie it's ready, because when it's ready, at some point you need to release it. So if you don't have a sales agent yet and you have the pressure to release it, because even sometimes it has to do with the funds that you have. When you have public funds, sometimes, they put you a clause that says like, well, you need to release your movie within the next 6 months, a year, whatever. So if you start running, that clock starts running and you don't have a sales agent, but you have the pressure to release your film in your local territory, and then you go to a sales agent and they ask you like, what happened to this movie? Did you release it? Yeah, I released it 6 months ago in Brazil. The sales agent is going to tell you this movie is sold, and you're going to say, well, but nobody else watched it, only in Brazil. Yeah, but today we have a big challenge in this market, which is piracy. If you release a movie, even though you take a lot of care, and there are companies, that take care of, movies not being put online, there is a big risk. Once you release your film in one territory, there is a big risk that your movie gets filtered online. So, it's true. Sales agent that knows that a film was already released 6 months ago, they will say, well, there's a big chance that this movie is already online, so I don't want to take the risk of buying it. So if you want to take a picture, you can see what are, like, for me, the best stages to reach out to a sales agent. And then the question is also, how do I reach out to a sales agent? What do I have to send? What do I have to say? What do I have to do? One thing that I believe it's important is if you are planning to go to a market and, reach out directly in person to sales agents, bear in mind that markets for sales agents are a place to sell. Not to acquire new product. They are there, their goal is to make money. They are not trying to find more product. They already have the product they need. Then after that market, they will start looking for new product, but not during the market. Sometimes at the last day of the market, they are more relaxed, so they are willing to take meetings with producers and start looking for new content. But what I'm trying to say is that to find a sales agent, you don't necessarily need to be in the market. You can reach out by email. One thing that you have to bear in mind is which are the dates of the markets. Like I said before, the main markets basically are Cannes in May. First off, you have EFM Berlin in February. That's the first market of the year. Then you have Cannes in May, and then you have AFM in November. So, when you think when is the best time, to reach out to a sales agent, is possibly ahead of those markets when they are trying to build their new lineup. So if you want your film to be sold in Berlin, probably you have to start reaching out around December, after the holidays, in January, when sales agents are looking for their product for Berlin. And that's the same. That the same applies to Cannes, Toronto is also a market, really. Toronto happens in September, and it's going to be a real market as well. So bear in mind those dates when approaching to a sales agent. But again, you don't really need to go to Toronto to find the sales agent. You can reach out to them by email. And how do you write that email? What do you put in that email? The effective outreach is not, it's just like when applying to festivals, it's not reaching out to 1,000 companies. It's reaching out to the ones that you think that can be a good fit for your project, and giving the right message. So what you have to think is you need to be clear when you're sending an email. Don't mass email people, putting like, dear buyer, I am and I have this movie. No, reach out, try to find, on Sinando, on these platforms that I told you, find the right person in the company, like who is doing the acquisitions. Usually all the companies have one person that does acquisitions, so find that person, find their email, and send a personalized email introducing yourself with a clear subject line. Also, don't put hi or new movie. No, what do you have? Do you have horror movie in post-production? Put that. Put the name of your movie and put like new horror movie in post-production from Brazil. So you're already looking for a sales agent, or horror movie from Brazil available for sales, for international sales. So, the person who reads that email, that will probably read that email on the phone, already see, okay, they are looking for a sales agent and they have a horror movie. I'm going to open this email, so be clear about that. And be clear also in the body of your email, which stage, what project do you have? So my movie is called this, it's a horror movie, or it's a movie with this actor, or it's the new movie from this director, the new movie from this director that won this festival. It's in post-production, it's in production, it's ready for delivery. We're looking for international sales. That's it. You don't need to put more information than that. Also, be relevant. Like, why are you contacting this company? Well, because you made your research. I'm contacting you because I think this movie could be a good fit for your profile. I saw that you sold this movie, and I believe my movie has a lot to do with this one, or is comparable to this one. Show that you have done your research, that you're not mass mailing companies just because you're desperate. Because you need to have something important in mind. You're not asking for a favor, right? You're not saying like, hey, watch my movie, I need a sales agent, I'm desperate. No, you're bringing a business opportunity. If this company works well with this kind of movie and you have a good movie in the same trend, you're bringing them the opportunity to do more business, to make more money. So you're offering them a partnership. You are the one who has the power, right? So you have to show yourself like that. Be concise also. Respect people's time. Send the essential information. Don't send things that are unsolicited. Sometimes people tell you the entire story of their film in the body of the email and put a 10 megabyte attachment to the email. And you know that sometimes attachments bring viruses, so people don't want to open, files that they don't know where they come from. Sometimes even companies have filters on their emails to send emails that have attachments directly to spam. So avoid, attaching big things that are not solicited. And also avoid, when I say be professional and keep your communication clear and organized and make sure you have the materials, maybe you just need to send, a very, very, very short synopsis or logline, a trailer, if you have it, that's something that you can send, but don't send the screener. Just wait, because, it's important. If you do your email well, you introduce yourself and everything, but you already send the screener, and the sales agent watch it and doesn't like it, they don't need to do anything. They already watched the movie. If they are polite enough, they might come back to you and tell you, well, it's not for me, thank you. But you already gave away your screener. If you give a little slice of what you have, you say, okay, I have this trailer, or if you don't have a trailer, you put a nice poster on, or you put just one image, you give a little taste, and the sales agent gets interested. They're gonna be, they're gonna have the need to come back to you and say, hey, send me a screener. So that's how the communication flows. And when they come back to you and ask you for a screener, have that screener ready. You can't say, oh no, I don't have it. I mean, unless you say, okay, the movie is in post-production, you can put on your first email, I will be able to send you a screener in 3 weeks, whatever, so they already know. But if you say, okay, my movie is in post-production, I have a first cut, or whatever, just always make your email, attractive enough for someone to respond to it and to say, okay, I want to know more. Don't give away all your information. And now we're going to go into the toughest part of everything. I hope it's not too boring. I know this can be very technical, and of course, my advice is never sign anything that, gives you, that doesn't make you feel sure about it, that you think there is something tricky about it. It's always good to have legal advice, of course. I mean, as much as you can understand, it's always good to show it to a lawyer or someone who really knows all the clauses, because sales agency agreements, remember, the sales agency agreement is the one, that the producer signs with the sales agent to give them the ability to represent you, can have like maybe 10 pages, 15 pages. So there are really a lot of things to consider. So it's always good to have a real professional in law reading it. But you as a producer, of course, need to know a little bit what we are talking about. And also, something that I heard from a UTA lawyer, UTA, it's the talent agency from Hollywood. This lawyer once told me in a class, hold on, I'm trying to remember the right quote. A first draft of a contract is always a sick patient. You have to heal it. What does this mean? The first version of the contract, usually it's all in benefit of the one who wrote it. If the sales agent writes a contract, they will probably put all the clauses for their best benefit, right? That doesn't mean that they are trying, to rip you off or something. But sometimes you have to negotiate some things, because of course they want to have the best, profit for them. So you have to be very aware of these clauses. So what the main things that you need to know or understand or have in mind when reading a professional sales agent agreement is, first off, the territory, the definition of the territory. What does this mean? Which countries you are giving the ability to the sales agent to sell your film in. Usually, when we talk about international sales, we say, okay, the entire world. Well, like I said before, usually you handle your own territory. So if it is a Brazilian film, the territory, the definition of the territory in the sales agency agreement will be the world excluding Brazil, right? Sometimes you have a co-producer, so it's not only a Brazilian film. Now it's a Brazilian-Argentinian co-production. So, the Argentinian producer will retain Argentina as well. So you will give the world excluding these 2 territories. And this is also important to know because I know that many funds in Brazil require you to have distributor in advance, to give you the money. So this is also something that sales agents understand, that sometimes you have to give some territories before. So nobody's going to be, mad at you because you're cutting territories. But if you start saying like, well, I'm going to give the world, but I'm going to keep my territory, my co-producer's territory, and the US because I have a good friend that told me that can make a deal. Well, try to avoid those things unless you have a real opportunity and someone comes to you and says like, hey, we can sign this contract and sell the US immediately. Try not to cut out a lot of territories because, it's also the work of the sales agent. If you give them a movie with the main territories already sold, it won't be attractive for them, But again, all of these clauses that I'm telling you are always negotiable. It's things that you need to talk and that you can talk with your sales agent and negotiate. Okay, maybe sometimes also one thing when we're going to talk about commissions, but also you can give them certain territories with a smaller commission. We'll talk more. I don't want to go into that yet. The rights also. Which rights are you giving them? Usually it's all rights, right? Because when we talked before, we said we're selling rights. We sell cinematic rights, that's theatrical rights. We sell TV rights. We sell VOD rights. We sell ancillary rights, the airlines and all that. We sell all kinds of online digital rights. We even sell home video rights. I know it sounds old-fashioned, but there are territories where people still buy DVDs or Blu-rays. So those are rights that are also sold. So usually when you put, which rights are you selling, you're selling all rights to sell, or you are signing for representation on all rights to a sales agent. Also, the minimum guarantee. This is the advance payment that the sales agent is gonna give you for the rights of your film. That means that if they give you $100,000 in advance for your film, then they have to recoup that 100,000 films from the first sales they make, and then they will start paying you what you earn. I know this is the best scenario. In reality, MGs are getting small. Minimum guarantees are getting smaller now because the market is difficult, and especially for independents. So companies are giving smaller MGs, and sometimes they are not even give you an MG. This doesn't mean that the company is not serious. Maybe it's a small company, they really don't want to risk giving you, $10,000, $20,000, but they can actually make good sales, and that's also a way, companies keep in business. If they start paying advances to everybody and then they cannot recoup that money, those companies go out of business. And it's also a problem for you, because if you have a sales agent that goes out of business because they run out of money, they go bankrupt, you're going to have an issue. You're no longer going to have a sales agent. So sometimes, wise sales agents tell you, I'd rather not give you an advance, but, I can tell you that I'm going to make these sales, and you can tell that this company is still in business and they have their clients, they are doing sales. So again, not having an MG doesn't mean that this is not a serious company. The commission is also important. The commission can go anywhere between 15% and 35%. I'll tell you why. So the commission is basically what the sales agent charge you on those sales for making their job. So the real standard on the industry is 20%. Companies that charge you less than 20%, maybe 15%, sometimes it's because of this. There's a lot of competition and they really want this movie. And there is another company trying to get it. And the only way they have, to have this movie is having it at a minor commission. So it's good for you because you have to pay them less. And it's still good for them because they rather have a movie that can be sold in 30 territories at a smaller commission than having a movie that can be sold with a better commission, but only in 5 territories, right? So that's something negotiable as well. And when I say 35, which is not really standard, but sometimes there are companies that tell you, okay, I keep 35% of commission, but I'm not charging you any other expenses. So 35 means you give me your movie, I keep 35, but I'm not going to charge you market screenings. I'm not going to charge you for my expenses on a trip, because that's also, when we talk about expenses, recoupable costs. When we talk about recoupable costs, that means, the money, like I said before, that the sales agent is going to invest in promoting your film. And that's not, a benefit. It's not something that they are going to give, do for free. They are going to charge you on that money. And that's also something that it has to be defined in the contract. How much money is the sales agent going to spend in your film? Because sometimes, and I really have seen this, I've seen companies that are real crooks, they went out of business, many of them, but I've seen companies charging, terrible market expenses, like, I don't know, $200,000, $300,000. And, producers without experience sign for that, and then they say, hey, this company sold my film for $100,000 in the US. Yes, but when you want to have your money, they tell you, yes, but you sign that I was going to invest $300,000 on the promotion of your film. So I'm still unrecouped on those costs, so I can't pay you anything yet. And maybe you don't get to see any money, never. So be very careful on how much money are they're gonna put in. It has to be, if they tell you you're gonna invest $300,000 dollars in your movie, if you have a low budget movie, it's really ridiculous. I mean, you have to be, there's no rule for that, but it's common sense, right? And also they have, the next step is the reporting and payments. When they report, they send you, okay, we made this money, but we invested this money in these markets. So that's, something they have to send you. So you're going to see how much money they are unrecouped yet on the money they invested, and how much money you're able to make. They will put, your commission. And also one important thing is that there is no company who is going to pay you for every single sale. It's not that they come back from Cannes and they send you the money they make, on sales in your film. There's usually a period of time, the reporting, it's meant to be made quarterly in the first year of the contract. Usually every 3 months, they will send you a report of all the sales they made on those on those months, and they will send you the payments accordingly if you're already making money. And for the second year and the rest of the term of the agreement, I didn't talk about term, I'm seeing now. For the rest of the term, it's usually going to be, 6 months, because, after the second year, usually, sales start going down. So they don't really need to send you a report every 3 months. They might send you a report every 6 months. And for the rest of the term, they can send you a report maybe once a year. And with the report, it will come the payment. Of course, there's always room to negotiate. If at some point you really need, the money to pay to someone, you can always give a call, to your sales agent and say like, hey, do you think, we can advance this payment before? The thing you have to bear in mind, like I said before, is that your sales agent has to be your partner. So it's someone that has to work with you and, be someone you rely and someone you can have a conversation with. I know there is a contract, you have to respect it. The sales agent has to respect it, but, have the ability to talk to your sales agent, work with someone you trust. And the term, of course, that I did mention that's really important is how long the agreement is going to last. For sales, the standard is usually 10 years. For international sales, it's usually 10 years, because this means they have, like I said before, they have the ability to sell your film in the first run of theaters, that it's usually a year. Then they will send all the runs of TV and VOD. And, then they can start selling packages. There are smaller TVs that buy, an entire package of films, older films to put in their library. So, usually all this cycle of sales takes 10 years because also the sales agent has to have the ability to, hold on, how do I explain this? I'm getting into a complicated stage. Like I said, you give the ability to your sales agent to enter other agreements on your behalf. Those agreements have a term too. And the standard for the term of those agreements between the sales agent on your behalf with the distributors is usually 7 to 10 years. But those years have to be covered in the agreement that the sales agent entered with you. Unless, usually you put 10 years on the sales agency agreement and plus, 2 or 3 to extend that period. But the sales agent can't enter an agreement on the last year of your sales agency agreement for 10 years with someone else because they won't be able to control what happens with those rights. So I don't know if that was clear. I know if something... Okay, good. If anyone has questions, ask me. I know this part is difficult and it's maybe boring, but it's something that you need to know. And the last item is the sales estimates. This means that the sales agent is going to give you a projected sales potential of your film. They will give you a list and they will give you the prices. They have what they call an ask price, which is what they actually ask the buyers for, and a take price, because it's not like going to a supermarket. You never pay what the sales agent asks for. It's usually a negotiation. So the sales agent will put in this list, I will ask for 300,000 on the US, but the real take and the lowest I can go to still make profit out of your film is 100,000. So why is it important to have this list? Because it's part of the abilities you are giving to a sales agent. You're telling them, okay, I signed this list of prices. If you enter any deals within these prices, you don't have to call me and ask for my authorization. You already have my authorization to sell my movie within these prices. Sometimes that's not possible, unfortunately. Sometimes you go to a market, you try to sell the film for the money you have on your list, you meet all the buyers or pretty much all the buyers that you think that are good for this film in a certain territory, let's say Turkey. You meet all the Turkish buyers, that could be 5, 6, it's not that there are a lot. You meet the 6 buyers and they tell you, no, I'm not able to pay 25,000, which is the price that they put on the sales estimates. So in that case, the wisest thing for the sales agent to do is call you, and say, hey, I'm not able to sell for the money that I promised you. The best offer that I got is 15,000. Do you want to take it? But, a serious sales agent will call you and ask for your permission. So that's why it's important to have the sales estimates on the agreement as well. Any questions on the agreement? There.
Hi, I would like to know if it's important to preview all the possible windows that you can sell in the agreement, or I mean, I don't know if if it's already something default.
In the definition of rights, you're putting all the rights that you are able to sell. Usually, I mean, if you want to know exactly what's the definition of rights, the official definition of rights that it's used in contracts, it's the one defined by IFTA, which is I don't remember exactly the words for IFTA, but it's basically an organization in the US that regulates somehow the market, the rules of the market, IFTA, IFTA. And they make the standard definition, not only of rights, but of territories. Because sometimes, territories can be tricky. You can see, French buyer can say, I want France and all French possessions, which sounds horrible. But, France unfortunately has a lot of territories in Africa, and they want to have the rights, to sell the movie in those territories. So to know or to understand all of those definitions, both for rights and territories, is always good to look at the definitions of rights by IFTA. But basically it's that, for VOD, to sell your movie to Netflix, they need to have the VOD rights, right? SVOD. I was going to say something else about rights. Hold on. It will come back. Oh, that usually, buyers want all rights, even though, it's like by territory, they buy all rights, except or even Netflix, I will tell you, right? I mean, Netflix might want all rights, even though they only will exploit SVOD, they will exploit the rights for their platform. They will still want all the rights because they don't want other company to exploit the rights for them. Of course, this is also negotiable because sometimes it's this local distributor that buys the film and first releases in a theater and then sells the rest of the rights to Netflix. But if you sell directly to Netflix, when you see a Netflix original movie, that means that they sold directly to Netflix. And Netflix will say, okay, I want all the rights. Sometimes with a good sales agent, you can negotiate retaining some rights, like free TV rights. So after a couple years, the movie that it's on Netflix can be seen on free TV. Or you can retain airline rights, so you can still watch a movie in airplanes. But you need to have a good sales agent that negotiates those things for you, because Netflix, it's a monster. Sorry, they will come and take everything, and they don't care what they do. They just want the film in the platform and the exclusivity to have the film in the platform. I don't know if that totally responds. Good. Thank you. Anything else? Oh.
I wanted to know what happens to the revenue that the sales agent makes when the take price goes lower than expected.
No, it's the same. It's the same revenue. I mean, if you mean the commission that they take, no, they have to respect the commission because they are asking for your authorization. If you authorize, they will keep the same commission. The commission never changes. I mean, that's one of the terms that usually you can negotiate in advance, but it's not serious to change your commission during the term of, except for exceptions that you really have to, discuss personally with the sales agent. But usually the commission is something you shouldn't discuss after you sign, because it's part of the effort that the sales agent makes, so they don't want to reduce their commission.
Hi, Florencia, me again. Could you explain a little bit better how those sales report works, how they are done, and how could the producer, I don't know, check if they are correct or something like that?
Well, usually with the report, they send you a copy of the agreement that they sign with the distributor, unless it's someone very bad that can. I've seen things like that. I've seen companies changing numbers. I mean, those companies at some point get out of business, because they are ripping off producers. But a serious sales agent usually sends you a copy of at least of the standard terms, because the sales the agreement between the sales agent and the distributor can also have 10-20 pages. But usually they sign what they call a deal memo, which is just one page with the standard terms. So they will send you a copy of those agreements, so you can check if the report is correct. And if you have any question or something, you can ask them, of course. Okay, one more and we continue.
Do sales agents group several films
Package.
like a package?
Well, that used to be a more accepted practice years ago. Sometimes, when you had as a sales agent, you had a very good movie that everybody wanted, and you had 2 other or 3 others that were not working so well. So, you said, okay, I'll give you the good one, but you still have to take these 3 for a smaller price, but take them. I mean, that was something that, 10 years ago was pretty standard. In today's market, because companies are not having a big budget and they don't have enough, not enough windows, but enough opportunities, because you might think, okay, now, with all the platforms, it might be easy to place movies that are not so sellable, but it's not true. Netflix cherry picks everything that it's not that they buy a package and put anything out there. So, in that sense, producers buyers tend to say no to package deals, but they can also package films on, like I said, on second runs, for TV, for free TV. Usually it's when the channel, reaches out to a sales agent, they never ask for just one film. They say, hey, I need 10 thrillers, 10 action films for prime time slot in free TV. So, and sometimes they don't even watch those films because they trust the sales agent, and they say, okay, as long as it is action and it doesn't have any sex, well, violence it might have, but not any sex or something like that, they sell a package. But when we talk about packages, we're talking about small prices, right? It's not the kind of package that used to be before. Luis. Okay, let's move forward because we still have a couple more slides, and then we can do some other questions. So another important thing that I keep saying from the beginning, trust your sales agent, be responsible with your sales agent, and have in mind that they are trying to do the best for your film. So what the sales agent commits to basically is promote the film in press, especially press for industry, take your film to markets, approach buyers, show your film to buyers, negotiate the deals on your behalf, and of course, report the activity. Do not trust people who say, I'm going to send you a report in 3 months, like you sign, and then the report never comes in. But also don't be the person that calls and say, like, hey, send me a report. Respect their times. Respect what the agreement says. Your responsibility as a producer is also important. Deliver materials on time. I've seen lots of producers that sign, because that's also one thing that it's on the agreement. I didn't explain it because it's one of the many terms that the agreement has. But the agreement also says that the producer is going to deliver a DCP master of the film, a ProRes master of the film, like the basic stuff for the sales agent to deliver the film to the buyers. And sometimes, producers sign that, and then it's like, okay, you have 3 months to send me a delivery, and it's a year long, and you keep asking, hey, I need the ProRes file, and they don't send it. So then the sales agent has to incur in more expenses to create that file to be able to not fail on the agreement they signed to a distributor. So really, respecting the clauses that you sign is important. Support the marketing efforts, the same thing. If they ask you for a poster, send the editable poster, have the fonts available. Cooperate, because, it's not only good for your film, it's also part of the responsibilities you have when you sign and when the sales agent signs for you. If the sales agent fails to deliver the film to a distributor, they are in a problem. The sales agent is in a problem, and you're in a problem because you're not going to get paid. Communicate effectively, like I said before. Be able to have a good conversation. Don't be too pushy or insistent, but at the same time, be able, to have a good conversation, a good relationship, and respect the agreed workflows. Like I said, if the agreement says you have to deliver in 3 months, if the agreement says you will receive the report in 3 months or 6 months, whatever, be respectful of those times. And then, well, this is one, this is pretty subjective, honestly. But expectations versus reality. I mean, there are some common misconceptions when talking about sales. Having a sales agent warranties sales. Like I said before, not always. A sales agent can be very sure that they like the film, they can promote it, they can do their best work. But there are external things that happen. I was selling films before the pandemic, and there were films that were very promising, and all of a sudden a pandemic hit the world and the cinemas closed, and we couldn't sell, we almost couldn't sell anything for a year, or even the films that were sold couldn't be released. So, all the money you were expecting from box office in theaters never came in because those films had to go straight to TV or platforms or smaller releases. When theaters reopened, they start having like limited capacity. So you were not able to sell 300 tickets per theater. You were only able to sell 50 tickets. And people were still not going to the theaters because they were afraid. So, having a sales agent doesn't guarantee that your film is going to always be sold. They are going to do their best effort, but many things can happen. Also, festivals automatically generate deals. That's also something that we talked before. Yeah, sometimes, winning the Palme d'Or or winning or having a selection in a big festival can push your film. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be sold only because it was selected in this festival. Bigger sales companies are not always better. Like I said before, maybe they don't have they won't put enough attention to all their films, or the fact that they are bigger doesn't mean that they fit your project needs. And that one market will change everything. Again, sometimes it happens that you go to a market, the first market, and nothing happens. And you get frustrated, and you think, oh no, I'm never going to sell my movie. No, maybe it takes time. Maybe it takes one more market, two more markets. Be patient. Money is not coming from the sky. And distributing, it's a very risky business, especially nowadays. So, buyers tend to be very cautious when buying films. Reality, like I said, is that sales take time, that not every film has the same market potential. We already discussed that at the very beginning, that success looks different for every film. For a documentary, like I said before, maybe going to a lot of festivals is the best they can have instead of having sales. For a short film, again, also doing festivals can be the success that they are looking for. And of course, that strategy, having a strategy and knowing the position of your film is what matters most. One final takeaway is that a sales agent can create opportunities because that's what they do. They go to markets, they push, they are behind buyers all the time, but they cannot create the demand where it doesn't exist. So, one more slide and we're done. Final takeaways. This is basically, just a summary of everything that we talked. The key questions that you have to ask yourself is how your project is positioned. What is success for your project? Which are your goals for this project? Which distribution path supports this project? Which opportunities should I pursue and which should I ignore? This is important, right? Like I said before, do not go to all the festivals. Go to the ones that you think are important or apply to the ones that you think are important for your film. Do not email all the sales agents. Email the ones that you think are important. And also sometimes it happens as well. And I just heard this from someone recently. Sometimes you find companies that send you an agreement, even without discussing much with you, sales companies that send you an agreement and it's like, yeah, I want your film. Do not trust those people. Sometimes, it's like, oh, I already have an offer, I will take it. Well, maybe, it's not the best. Who makes an offer without discussing or without knowing you or maybe even without watching the film, So, again, those are opportunities that maybe you should ignore or maybe you should discuss and not go for them without considering. And last but not least, if you need a sales agent, what kind of sales agent do you need, right? Everything that we talked about, which is the best fit for our film. So I think that's everything I can teach you in 4 hours. I hope it wasn't boring for you. I mean, for me, it's fun, but I know sometimes it can be a bit boring, and sometimes I might not be the best person to explain it, but I hope you understand or you have something good to take from this workshop. Feel free to make any questions. We have 6 minutes. Okay.
Florencia, first of all, thank you very much. It was incredible. A lot of fun. It's the second time that I watched our lecture. Last year I was here
Thanks.
as well, and it was awesome as well. So you're always great.
Oh, thanks.
I want to ask you something very particular about Cannes, because everybody is saying that Cannes became like a business model. Can you comment a little bit about it?
Well, what can I say about Cannes? I mean, yeah, it's a market, really. I mean, it's the biggest event of the industry. I know from the outside, for people that are not part of the industry, they might see it's a glamorous event, and you see the red carpet and everything. But at the end of the day, that's the less important part. The important part is really the business for them. Unfortunately, when I say it's the business, and I think that's your question related to, it used to be that, okay, you had the official selection that used to be like the most prestigious films, and someone would think those are the best films they found. But when I say it's also a business, it's like they are not really looking for the best films. They are really looking for films that can track sales, that can track other co-productions. Sometimes they try to benefit certain countries because, it's also, bear in mind that it's France, that it's organizing. So they will have their own interests in films and in their industry. Even politics, can be involved. So yes, I mean, there's no right question, and I know it's controversial, but my personal feeling is that they are no longer looking for the best films, and that being in Cannes doesn't mean that your film is better than others. It means that they think, or the programmers or the organizers, even the sponsors, there are lots of private companies that are putting money in Cannes. So all of those people have, business interests in the films, and the festival has to respond to those interests. So that's why I say don't insist. I mean, if you get selected in Cannes, don't get me wrong, it's great. Everybody wants to be there. But if you don't feel that your film is less important, or don't watch, because you might watch another film, you might watch Emilia Perez and ask yourself, why the hell this movie is in the competition? Well, because it's Jacques Audiard, which is a French well-known producer, because also, director, because it's also a Netflix production, and now, the festival has to respond to the demands of Netflix. So, it's not because Emilia Perez is a good film, not at all. So don't feel that, I made this movie and they might think it's worse than Emilia Perez. No, your movie is probably better. Emilia Perez is really bad, and have that, sorry, I have to say, it's really bad. It's disrespectful. It's really a disrespectful movie. And but the fact that it's in Cannes doesn't make it any better.
Pode ser a última essa.
Hi. My question is about how do you see the short films market for distribution and making money back with short films? And the other one, as a producer, should we trust companies that do sales and distribution at the same time, or is that's not an option at all?
Yes. Well, to respond to the second question before I forget it, yeah, I mean, they cannot distribute in every single territory. There are serious companies like Gaumont in France that does local distribution in France and also international sales. Yes, you can trust them. I mean, if they tell you that they do distribution worldwide, no, nobody can cover the entire world and put the same effort in all the territories. But you have, I believe, Neon is also handling, or A24 is also handling international sales for their titles, and they are great at doing distribution in the US. So again, I think that when you say distribution and sales, well, distribution where? In their local territory, yes, that's totally fine. I mean, then you'll see what they actually do. But in principle, it's not a problem, really. I mean, it depends on what they are promising. And for short films, we talked at the beginning, I don't think there's really commercial potential on short films, not because I say it, it's just because, you know, realistically talking, how many times or where do we see short films being showcased, right? Many countries are starting, you know, or have already, policies like public policies, you know, to showcase short films before the films in theaters, and they might pay you a little MG or a little money on that, on those rights. Also, you know, if your short film is really good and all the festivals want it, they will start paying you screening fees, you know, and those screening fees can be 200, 300 euros. But again, we're talking about very small amounts. Also, some TVs in Europe, cultural TVs, you know, maybe in Latin America it's no longer a thing, or it's no longer relevant. But in Europe, public televisions are still strong. Maybe not as they used 2 years ago, but they are still strong. And they still have a budget, you know, for educational, cultural content. And they understand that, you know, short films need a screen as well. So again, they might pay you some money. They might pay the distributors. That's another workshop itself. And I'm not an expert on short films precisely. I mean, I have some experience, but I can tell that, you know, that doesn't mean that a short film doesn't have value. We already said it at the beginning. The short film opens other opportunities. It gives you recognition as a director. It gives you opportunity to prove some technique, to prove some concept, you know, to work, you know, on a smaller budget. Maybe you have, you know, sometimes you see short films that have, you know, some big actor and you say like, hi, how did they get it? Well, maybe because a short film, you know, for a short film, you need this actor for 1 day only, for 1 day of work, and someone is a friend and whatever, and, you know, you convince them to be in your short film, but you get to direct a very good recognized actor, and that gives you, you know, recognition as a director. I think, you know, short films have a different value. Maybe it's not economic. There is some value. I'm not an expert on that, but if I can quote a very good distributor of animated short films, Nicolas Schmerkin from Autor de Minuit. He's Argentinian, but he has a very good company in France. He even won an Oscar. He's the producer and distributor of Logorama, the animated short film that won in 2009. And on a workshop like this, he started by saying, you will ask yourself, can I make money with an animated short film? The short, fast response is no. You can eventually secondary make money out of festivals, small deals with some platforms sometimes that start including short films. But in reality, you have to see, like, where do I see short films? Just in festivals, maybe online. If you build a community about the short film and start, maybe you have a good a popular YouTube channel, you can monetize and make money out of it. or you can make a campaign, and promote your film on social media and say like, hey, pay $1 to watch the short film. That's totally valid and it works for some projects, but it's not. What I mean is that short films don't make revenue on the traditional business models. It's okay? Well, we have to finish here. Thank you everybody for being here. I really appreciate it.